Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the glittering, treacherous world of Tudor England, where a queen who never married kept one man closer than any other for nearly half a century. You're walking through the corridors of power beside Robert Dudley, a boy born into nobility but shadowed by his family's disgrace. A man who would become the most controversial figure at Elizabeth I's court. Picture the rustle of velvet doublets, the flicker of candlelight on jewelled fingers, the whispered rumours that could destroy a reputation overnight. Tonight, you'll witness a relationship so intense, so complicated, that historians still argue about its true nature 5 centuries later. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why the most powerful woman in Europe refused every marriage proposal from kings and princes, or what really happened on a September evening in 1560 when Robert's wife was found dead at the bottom of a staircase. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or share your favourite Tudor fact. I love hearing from you. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're in the year 1543 and you're 7 years old. Your name is Robert Dudley, and you're standing in the gardens of a grand estate, watching a girl with copper-red hair practice her Latin declensions with her tutor. She's 10, and her name is Elizabeth. You don't know it yet, but this girl, currently 3rd in line to the throne and deemed illegitimate by her father's decree, will one day rule England, and you'll spend your entire life in her orbit, closer than any man alive, yet never quite touching the prize you desire most. Your father is John Dudley, an ambitious man climbing the treacherous ladder of Tudor politics. He's clever, ruthless when necessary, and determined to elevate your family from mere nobility to something approaching royalty. You have brothers John, Ambrose, Guildford, Henry, a whole pack of Dudley boys being groomed for greatness. Your childhood is privileged but precarious. One wrong move at court, one whispered word of disloyalty, and everything your family has built could crumble like old parchment. Elizabeth Tudor's childhood is even more complicated than yours. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was beheaded when Elizabeth was barely 3 years old, accused of adultery and treason by her own father, King Henry VIII. Imagine growing up knowing that fact, carrying it like a stone in your chest. Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, stripped of her title as princess, and shuffled between households depending on her father's mood and his current wife's tolerance. Yet she's brilliant, everyone can see it. She speaks multiple languages fluently, reads classical texts with ease, and possesses a sharp political mind that will one day outmaneuver the best strategists in Europe. You and Elizabeth don't spend every day together, but when your paths cross in those early years, there's a connection. Perhaps it's the shared understanding of what it means to be close to power but not secure in it. Perhaps it's simply that you're both intelligent, curious children in a world of scheming adults. You're charming even then. Robert tall for your age, athletic, good with horses. Elizabeth notices. She always notices. The years roll forward. Henry VIII dies in 1547 and his young son becomes King Edward VI. Your father sees opportunity. John Dudley manoeuvres himself into the position of Lord President of the Council, effectively ruling England on behalf of the teenage king. Your family's star is rising, and you're swept up in the glory of it. You're given positions, honours, lands. You marry a woman named Amy Robsart in 1550, a love match. Some say, though love in Tudor England is often mixed with practical considerations, Amy brings you property and connections. She's sweet, gentle, everything a wife should be by the standards of the day. But then Edward VI, that frail boy king, begins to die. He has tuberculosis, and everyone at court knows the throne will soon need a new occupant, by law. It should pass to his older half-sister Mary, Henry VIII's daughter by his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. But Mary is Catholic, and England under Edward has become Protestant. Your father, John Dudley, cannot allow a Catholic queen, so he hatches a desperate, audacious plan. Your younger brother Guildford is married to Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant girl with royal blood. She's Henry VIII's great niece. When Edward dies in July 1553, your father proclaims Jane as queen. For 9 days, she sits on England's throne. 9 days. Then Mary Tudor rallies her supporters, marches on London, and takes what is rightfully hers by the laws of succession. Jane is deposed, your brother Guildford is arrested, your father is arrested, and you, Robert Dudley, 20 years old and newly married, find yourself imprisoned in the Tower of London, awaiting trial for high treason. The charge is simple: your family tried to steal the crown. The punishment for treason is equally simple: death. You watch your father march to the scaffold. John Dudley, who climbed so high, falls spectacularly. He's executed on August 22nd, 1553. Your brother Guildford follows months later, along with poor Jane Grey, the 9 days queen who never wanted power in the first place. Historians still argue whether John Dudley was a visionary trying to preserve Protestant England, or simply a power-hungry schemer who used his children as pawns. Perhaps he was both. You expect to die too. You're locked in a cold cell waiting for your name to be called. But then something remarkable happens. Mary shows mercy not to all of you, but to some. Perhaps she remembers that you were young, that you followed your father's orders as sons did in those days. Perhaps her advisors convince her that executing every Dudley male would create too many martyrs. Whatever the reason, you're spared. After months in the Tower, you're released in October 1554, your lands and titles stripped away, your family name a synonym for treachery. And here's where fate plays its hand, also imprisoned in the Tower during this time, in separate quarters but under the same stone roof, is Princess Elizabeth. Mary suspects her Protestant half-sister of being involved in plots against her Catholic regime. Elizabeth is terrified, knowing that her sister could easily sign her death warrant, as their father once signed their mother's. The Tower is a place of shadows and fear, where today's prisoner is tomorrow's corpse. You and Elizabeth can't meet freely, but in a place like the Tower, messages travel through sympathetic guards, through servants who feel sorry for royal prisoners. Some historians believe you found ways to communicate during those dark months, strengthening a bond forged in childhood. Whether you exchanged actual letters or simply knew the other was nearby, suffering similar fears, the experience brands itself onto both your souls. When you're finally released, you're a man marked by disgrace. Your father died a traitor. Your family fortune is gone. You're in your early 20s with a wife in the country and no clear path forward. But you have one advantage that will change everything Elizabeth Tudor remembers you. And in 1558, when Mary dies and Elizabeth becomes Queen of England at age 25, one of her first acts is to summon you to court and appoint you Master of the Horse, a position that keeps you at her side, literally, every day. You're standing in the Tower of London in the spring of 1554, and the walls around you have witnessed executions, betrayals, and the final prayers of condemned souls for centuries. The stone is cold, perpetually damp, and you can smell the Thames River seeping through the ancient foundations. Your cell isn't the worst accommodation your nobility. After all, even disgraced nobility, but it's still a prison, and every morning you wake wondering if this is the day they'll come for you with an executioner's warrant. Your father's head rotted on a spike above London Bridge for weeks as a warning to anyone who might challenge Queen Mary's authority. Your brother Guildford and his teenage wife, Jane Grey, walked the scaffold just months ago. You heard the bells toll when they died. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between guards' footsteps echoing down corridors, you imagine your own walk to Tower Green, the crowd gathered to watch, the executioner sharpening his blade. It's a peculiar form of torture. This waiting, not knowing, is almost worse than knowing. But you're not the only royal prisoner wasting away in these chambers. Princess Elizabeth arrived at the Tower through the Traitor's Gate in March 1554, brought by boat just as her mother Anne Boleyn had been nearly 2 decades earlier. Everyone knows that story, how Anne came to the Tower as queen and left as a corpse. Her head struck off by a French swordsman her husband specially imported for the task. Elizabeth must think about that constantly. How could she not? She's 20 years old, Protestant in a newly Catholic England, and her half-sister Queen Mary suspects her of involvement in Thomas Wyatt's rebellion. Wyatt had tried to prevent Mary from marrying Philip of Spain, a union that would bind England to Catholic Spain's fortunes. The rebellion failed spectacularly, and now everyone connected to it or even suspected of sympathy with it faces questioning, imprisonment, or worse. Elizabeth swears she knew nothing of the plot, that she's a loyal subject of the crown, but loyalty is a slippery concept in Tudor politics. Mary's advisers whisper that the Protestant princess would make a perfect figurehead for future rebellions. Some argue she should be executed preemptively. For the safety of the realm. You probably don't see Elizabeth during those months. Men and women prisoners are kept separately, and she's far too important to be allowed casual contact with other inmates. But you know she's there. Everyone in the Tower knows. Guards talk, servants gossip. And in a place this small, relatively speaking, awareness of one's fellow sufferers spreads like fog off the river. Some historians believe you managed to send messages to her through sympathetic attendants. Words of encouragement from one prisoner to another, from one person marked by their family's choices to another trapped by accident of birth. Here's a quirky detail that few people know. Elizabeth later told her courtiers that during her imprisonment, she would walk in a small garden area for exercise, and she'd notice carved messages on the walls left by previous prisoners. One inscription, allegedly carved by Catholic prisoners during her father's reign, read a prayer to Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife. Elizabeth found bitter irony in this. Jane was her dead half-brother Edward's mother, and now Elizabeth, Edward's sister, stood in the same spot facing potential execution. History, she realised even then, moves in strange circles. The political situation in 1554 is a powder keg. Mary married Philip of Spain in July of that year, a deeply unpopular match. England had fought wars against Spain. English Protestants feared Spanish Catholicism. Mary, desperate for an heir to secure Catholic succession, believed Philip would give her children. She even convinced herself she was pregnant, her belly swelling, but it was phantom pregnancy, perhaps caused by stress or a medical condition. Historians still argue whether it was wishful thinking, deliberate fraud, or genuine medical delusion. The pregnancy eventually disappeared, leaving Mary humiliated and increasingly paranoid. During these tense months, Elizabeth walks a knife's edge. She cooperates with her interrogators but admits nothing. She writes letters to Mary protesting her innocence in language so carefully crafted that lawyers centuries later still admire the wordplay. She knows that one wrong phrase could sign her death warrant, that Mary wants to believe the best, but is surrounded by Spanish advisers who see Elizabeth as an obstacle to Catholic restoration. Your situations aren't identical. You're imprisoned because of what your family definitely did. While Elizabeth is imprisoned because of what people fear she might do, but you both understand viscerally that royal favour is fickle and survival requires perfect timing. You're released in October 1554 probably because Mary decides you're not worth the political cost of execution. Your father was the mastermind. You were just a son following orders. It's a narrow escape. And you emerge from the tower without lands, without money, with nothing but your name, and even that name is tainted. Robert Dudley, son of a traitor. You return to your wife Amy in the countryside. Trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from ruins, Elizabeth remains imprisoned longer. She's not released until May 1555, and even then she's not truly free. Mary places her under house arrest at Woodstock, then later allows her to live at her own estate at Hatfield, but always with watchers, always with the understanding that one false step could mean the Tower again. Those years 1554 to 1558 are a masterclass in survival for Elizabeth. She attends Catholic Mass to please Mary, but doesn't convert in her heart. She dresses modestly, speaks carefully, and waits. Waiting becomes her greatest skill. You spend those same years in relative obscurity, but you're working angles. You have one asset, your body. You're athletic, exceptionally skilled with horses, and as the 1550s progress, you start to rebuild connections through tournaments and military service. In 1557, when England goes to war, alongside Spain against France, you fight at the Battle of St. Quentin. It's not a particularly glorious campaign. England loses Calais, its last continental possession. In January 1558, a humiliation that breaks Mary's heart, but you distinguish yourself enough to regain some honour. The Dudley name can be associated with bravery again, not just treason. And then, in November 1558, everything changes. Mary Tudor dies, probably of ovarian cancer or uterine cancer, though no one knows for certain. She's 42 years old and has spent her reign trying to drag England back to Rome, burning Protestants at the stake in numbers that will earn her the posthumous nickname Bloody Mary. Her death is almost a relief to a country exhausted by religious extremism and economic troubles. The crown passes to her half-sister, and Elizabeth Tudor, survivor of suspicion, imprisonment, and constant danger, becomes Elizabeth the Queen of England and Ireland. You're 35 years old when Elizabeth summons you to court. She's 25. She knows you from childhood. She knows you survived the Tower just as she did, and she trusts you in ways she trusts almost no one else. Her first major appointment stuns the court. She names you Master of the Horse, one of the most prestigious positions in the royal household. Officially, you're in charge of the Queen's stables, her transportation, her safety during travels. Unofficially, you're given constant access to her presence. The Master of the Horse rides beside the Queen, walks beside her, stands near her during ceremonies. It's a position of intimacy, and everyone notices. Eyebrows raise immediately. Robert Dudley, the traitor's son. And he's married, isn't he? Where's his wife? Amy Dudley remains at Cumnor Place in Berkshire, living quietly while her husband resumes his place in the glittering court. This arrangement isn't unusual. Many courtiers' wives stayed in the country, managing estates while their husbands pursued power in London, but combined with Robert's obvious closeness to the new Queen, rumours begin almost instantly. Some whisper that Elizabeth is infatuated with her Master of the Horse. Others whisper darker things, that they're lovers, that the unmarried Queen is compromising her reputation, that Robert plans to divorce Amy, or worse, to free himself for marriage to Elizabeth. The Spanish ambassador, writing reports back to King Philip II, notes with alarm that Elizabeth shows Robert extraordinary favour. He observes them dancing together at court celebrations, laughing at private jokes, speaking in low voices while others strain to overhear. Philip, Mary's widower, had briefly considered marrying Elizabeth himself to maintain Spanish influence in England, but it's clear within months that Elizabeth has no intention of marrying him or any foreign prince. She seems interested in only one man, and he's utterly unsuitable a subject. Not a king, a married man, a Dudley. For God's sake. Do you remember how you met Elizabeth as a child? How your paths wound together through privilege and peril? Now those paths have converged completely. You're at the centre of power, but it's a dangerous centre, built on whispers and desire and the will of a woman who answers to no one. The tower's shadow still stretches over both of you, a reminder of how quickly fortune can reverse. But for now, in these early years of Elizabeth's reign, your golden her favourite and ruled, her Robert, her eyes. Some historians believe that this is when you fall truly, deeply in love with her. Others argue you're simply ambitious, seeing the Queen as your path back to the greatness your family lost. Maybe it's both. Maybe love and ambition are impossible to separate when the object of your desire wears a crown. You're standing in a manor house called Cumnor Place on a September afternoon in 1560, except you're not actually there. You're miles away with the Queen at Windsor Castle. But let's put you there in imagination, because what happens at Cumnor Place this day will haunt you for the rest of your life and destroy your greatest dream before it even fully forms. Your wife Amy is 28 years old. She's been living at Cumnor Place, a property owned by your friend Anthony Forster, for several months now. The house isn't yours, you've been rebuilding your fortune, but you're not yet wealthy enough to maintain her in the style you'd prefer, so she lodges with the Forsters. A respectable arrangement for a woman whose husband spends most of his time at court. Amy hasn't been well lately. Servants whisper that she's melancholy, that she complains of pains in her breast, that she seems distracted and sad. Historians still argue whether she was physically ill, perhaps with breast cancer, which could explain the pain, or whether she was simply heartbroken. Knowing her husband was the subject of every scandalous rumour in England. The rumours about you and Elizabeth have reached fever pitch by the summer of 1560. Foreign ambassadors report to their kings that the Queen of England is besotted with Lord Robert Dudley, that they're inseparable, that she refuses to consider marriage proposals from foreign princes because she's waiting for something. But waiting for what? You're married. Under English law and church doctrine, marriage is indissoluble except by death. Divorce exists in theory, but is nearly impossible to obtain and carries social disgrace. So the rumours take a darker turn. People whisper that you plan to poison Amy, that Elizabeth will look the other way, that once Amy is conveniently dead, you'll marry the Queen and become King of England. These aren't just tavern gossip. Foreign ambassadors write these theories in official dispatches. The Spanish ambassador reports that Amy is sick and that you're waiting for her to die. The Swedish ambassador, representing a king who wants to marry Elizabeth himself, notes acidly that Lord Robert's wife is an obstacle to his ambitions. Even Elizabeth's trusted advisor William Cecil expresses concern in his private papers about the scandal surrounding the Queen's relationship with you. The whole of Europe is watching and judging. September 8th, 1560 is a Sunday. Amy sends her servants to the fair at Abingdon, insisting they take the day off despite their protests that it's inappropriate to attend a fair on a Sunday. This detail will become crucial later because it means the house is nearly empty. Only Amy and perhaps one or two others remain at Cumnor Place. When the servants return that evening, they find Amy dead at the bottom of a staircase, her neck broken. The news reaches you at court within days and your world implodes. Your wife is dead under suspicious circumstances at the exact moment when her death benefits you most. Even if you're completely innocent and you've been at Windsor Castle with the Queen, nowhere near Cumnor Place. With dozens of witnesses to prove it, the timing is catastrophic. Every whispered rumour about poison and murder suddenly seems vindicated. Of course Lord Robert arranged his wife's death. People say, of course he did it so he could marry Elizabeth. The fact that Amy fell downstairs rather than being poisoned doesn't matter to the gossips. They simply adjust their theories. Perhaps you hired someone to stage an accident. Perhaps you bribed servants to look the other way. Elizabeth's reaction is swift and politically astute. She immediately sends you away from court not in disgrace, but to make clear you're not influencing her response. She orders a coroner's inquest, demanding a thorough investigation. This is smart governance by treating Amy's death seriously. Elizabeth tries to quell rumours that she's covering up murder to protect her favourite. The inquest convenes, examines the evidence, interviews servants and household members. The coroner's jury returns a verdict of death by misadventure and accidental fall. They note injuries consistent with falling downstairs, a broken neck and 2 head wounds. But here's where the story gets genuinely mysterious. The jury also notes that Amy had 2 dents in her skull that seemed deeper than one might expect from a simple fall down 8 or so stairs. Historians still argue about this. Some suggest she was murdered, that someone crept up behind her and struck her head before pushing her. Others propose she had breast cancer that had metastasized to her bones, making them brittle enough to fracture catastrophically from even a minor fall. Still others wonder if Amy, depressed and ill, threw herself down the stairs deliberately, suicide disguised as accident to protect her soul's salvation. Since suicide was considered a mortal sin, modern forensic experts examining the 1560 evidence suggest that Amy might have had cancer-related bone fragility and fallen, striking her head in ways that produced those unusual injuries. A 2008 analysis proposed she had breast cancer that spread to her spine, causing a spontaneous vertebral fracture that made her fall. But this remains speculation. The truth died with Amy Robsart on that September afternoon, leaving only questions that echo across centuries. For you, Robert, the verdict of misadventure should be exoneration. The official investigation found no evidence of murder, but public opinion is less forgiving. Pamphlets circulate suggesting you got away with murder through wealth and influence. Foreign courts repeat the scandal with relish. The English Queen's favourite killed his wife and escaped justice. Your reputation, already damaged by your father's treason, takes another devastating blow. You're the man whose wife died conveniently, and no amount of protest changes that perception. And here's the cruelest irony: Amy's death, which should theoretically free you to marry Elizabeth, actually makes that marriage impossible. Elizabeth is many things brilliant, calculating, politically shrewd, but she's not reckless. She knows that marrying you now would confirm every ugly rumour, would make her look complicit in murder, or at least in covering it up. It would give her enemies, both domestic and foreign, ammunition to question her legitimacy, her morality, her fitness to rule. So the very event that removes the legal obstacle to your marriage creates an insurmountable political obstacle. In the months after Amy's death, Elizabeth keeps you at court but maintains careful public distance. She's kinder to you in private, sources suggest, but she needs to demonstrate to her counsellors and to foreign powers that she's not controlled by lust or sentiment. William Cecil, her brilliant Secretary of State, almost certainly advises her that marrying you would be political suicide. The English people might tolerate a queen who never marries, but they won't tolerate one who marries a suspected murderer. You're devastated. Though you hide it behind courtly charm, you've lost your wife. Whether you loved her still is debated. Marriage is often cooled over time, especially when separated by distance and ambition, and you've lost your chance at the throne. Because make no mistake, you did hope to marry Elizabeth. The evidence is clear in letters and diplomatic reports you pursued that goal actively in 1559 and 1560 before Amy's death made it impossible. You loved Elizabeth, probably genuinely, but you also saw that marriage as the restoration of everything your family lost. Dudleys would rise again, higher than ever, to the very throne of England. Some historians argue Amy's death was genuinely accidental, a tragic coincidence. Others maintain suspicion that someone perhaps acting without your knowledge or Elizabeth's decided to remove an inconvenient obstacle. A few suggest Amy, knowing she was dying of cancer anyway and wanting to free you, staged her death to look accidental. The mystery has spawned novels, films, endless academic papers. What's certain is this: on September 8th, 1560, whatever path might have led to King Robert close forever, you'll remain close to Elizabeth, powerful and influential, but you'll never be king. Amy Robsart's broken body at the bottom of those stairs stands between you and the crown like a ghost that never fades. In quiet moments, do you replay that day? Wonder what would have happened if Amy had lived? If she died of illness a year later under unambiguous circumstances? If the timing had been different, you'll spend the next 30 years as close to the throne as any man can be without sitting on it. And you'll always know that a different roll of fate's dice might have placed you there. But the dice fell how they fell, and Amy's death freed you legally while imprisoning you politically in a cage you'll never escape. You're riding through the streets of London in the early 1560s, and people turn to watch you pass. Some gaze with admiration. You cut an impressive figure on horseback, tall and athletic, dressed in velvet and jewels that catch the sunlight. Others stare with something darker in their eyes: resentment, suspicion, barely concealed hostility. You're Lord Robert Dudley, Master of the Horse, and everyone knows you're the Queen's favourite, and that position brings power, wealth, and danger in equal measure. Your official duties as Master of the Horse involve managing the royal stables, overseeing hundreds of horses, coordinating the Queen's transportation, and ensuring her safety during progresses, those elaborate summer tours where Elizabeth travels from estate to estate, showing herself to her people. But everyone knows the real value of your position proximity. You're with Elizabeth constantly. You ride beside her when she travels. You stand near her during ceremonies. You have access to her private chambers in ways that make foreign ambassadors raise eyebrows and write scandalized reports to their kings. The royal stables under your management are magnificent. You oversee everything from the great war horses used in tournaments to the delicate palfreys Elizabeth prefers for leisure riding. You personally select horses for the Queen. Knowing her preferences, she likes spirited animals, but not dangerously wild ones. Horses with elegant gaits that make her look regal when she processes through crowds. You arrange riding expeditions, hunting parties, all the equestrian entertainments that Elizabeth adores, and during these activities, you're always there, always close, always attentive. Here's a quirky detail that reveals the intimacy of your position. You have a key to Elizabeth's private staircase. This is documented in household records and mentioned in scandalized whispers. A private staircase means you can reach her apartments without being observed by the full court, without running the gauntlet of guards and ladies-in-waiting who might report your visits. Does this mean you're lovers? Historians still argue. The physical evidence is ambiguous. Elizabeth's ladies certainly suspect something. Some report that you visit her chambers early in the morning, that you're with her late at night. But whether these visits involve political discussion, romantic conversation, or physical intimacy remains unknowable. Elizabeth keeps her secrets well. What's undeniable is the influence you wield. Men seeking royal favour court your goodwill. You can whisper in Elizabeth's ear, recommend appointments, smooth the path for petitioners, or obstruct those who displease you. By the mid-1560s, you're accumulating offices and grants: Constable of Windsor Castle, Lieutenant of Windsor Forest, positions that come with lands and income. Elizabeth showers you with gifts. She gives you the manor of Kenilworth in 1563, one of the most magnificent castles in England. You begin transforming Kenilworth into a showplace, spending vast sums to create gardens, fountains, and accommodations worthy of entertaining a queen. But this favour breeds enemies. William Cecil, Elizabeth's Secretary of State, views you with deep suspicion. Cecil is Protestant, pragmatic, utterly devoted to England's security and prosperity. He believes Elizabeth should marry a foreign prince to secure alliances and produce heirs. Your presence blocks that strategy. As long as Elizabeth dotes on you, she's less interested in foreign suitors. Cecil never moves openly against you, he's too clever for that. But in his private papers he records concerns about your influence, your ambitions, your unsuitability as a potential king consort. The Duke of Norfolk despises you with an aristocrat's contempt for an upstart. Norfolk is England's only duke, descended from ancient noble lines, and he views you as a traitor's son who's risen absurdly above your station through the Queen's infatuation. Other nobles share his disdain. They have to bow to you, have to seek your favour, have to watch you accumulate honours that they believe belong to men of older, more distinguished families. Your father's treason taints you in their eyes. They'll never forget that John Dudley tried to steal the throne, and they suspect his son harbours similar ambitions. The common people have mixed feelings. Some admire your rise from disgrace to glory. It's a compelling story, especially since you're handsome and charming when you want to be. You understand public relations before the term exists. You're generous with bribes and gifts to strategic people. You sponsor entertainments. You make yourself visible as a patron of Protestant causes. But others mutter about Amy's death, about the scandal, about whether the Queen's virtue is compromised by her relationship with you. Protestant morality runs strong in 1560s England, and many find the whole situation unseemly. Elizabeth's own feelings about you are complex and perhaps contradictory. She clearly loves your company. The evidence is overwhelming in letters, diplomatic reports, and the testimony of courtiers. You make her laugh. You share her interests in hunting, riding, and dancing. You're intelligent enough to converse on politics and religion, but not so independently powerful that you threaten her authority. You're Protestant, which matters to her, and there's genuine affection, perhaps even romantic love in some form. But Elizabeth is also cautious. She remembers her mother's fate, how Anne Boleyn's sexuality was used against her by Henry VIII. Elizabeth knows that queens must be above suspicion, that any hint of sexual impropriety can be weaponized by enemies. So she keeps you close but never quite commits. She dangles the possibility of marriage, lets you hope, but never says yes. This pattern will continue for decades, and it drives foreign ambassadors mad trying to understand her intentions. Does she plan to marry Robert? Is she waiting for political circumstances to change? Or is she simply enjoying the emotional and political benefits of an intense relationship without the legal entanglements of marriage? In 1563, England faces a crisis. Elizabeth contracts smallpox and nearly dies. She's desperately ill, covered in pustules, burning with fever. Her doctors despair. The court panics because she has no named heir if she dies. England could descend into civil war as various factions support different claimants to the throne. Do you remember how fragile power is? How quickly everything can change? Elizabeth's sickness reminds everyone of that precarity. During her illness, delirious with fever, Elizabeth supposedly tells her counsellors that if she dies, they should make you Lord Protector of England and grant you an income of £20,000 a year. She insists, according to reports, that although you share a bed sometimes, nothing improper has occurred between you. This detail becomes famous, cited as either evidence of innocence or a feverish lie designed to protect both your reputations. What's true? Even the counsellors present couldn't be certain. A delirious woman's words are hardly reliable testimony. Yet the fact that Elizabeth's first concern is protecting you reveals the depth of her attachment. She survives the smallpox, marked with scars she'll cover with thick white makeup for the rest of her life. And the succession crisis is temporarily averted. But the episode forces her to confront the question she's been avoiding. She needs an heir. If not through her own marriage and childbirth, then through naming a successor. Yet she resists naming anyone, knowing that naming an heir would make that person a focus for plotters and malcontents who prefer waiting for the next reign. You push for marriage yours to her. Throughout the early 1560s, you actively campaign for this outcome. You have supporters who argue that marrying an English nobleman would be better than tying England to foreign interests. But the obstacles remain insurmountable. Amy's suspicious death, your family's tainted history, the political firestorm such a marriage would ignite. Elizabeth's counsellors nearly unanimously oppose the match. Even those who, like you, personally believe you're wrong for the Queen. By 1564 you seem to accept reality. You'll never marry Elizabeth. You'll remain her favourite, shower her with love and attention, wield considerable influence. But you won't be king. It's a bitter pill, sweetened slightly by the wealth and power you do possess. You're one of the richest men in England now, a member of the Privy Council, a man whose word carries weight. It's not the throne, but it's far above where you stood in 1554 when you walked out of the Tower with nothing. Still, ambition is hard to kill. You begin considering alternatives. If you can't marry Elizabeth, perhaps you can arrange for her to marry someone manageable, someone who'll recognise your continued importance. You even participate in negotiations trying to match Elizabeth with foreign princes, playing the loyal servant helping his queen find a suitable husband. Is this selfless strategic? Or does part of you hope every negotiation fails so you remain her primary male companion? Probably all three. Human motivations are rarely simple, especially when power and love tangle together so completely. The years as Master of the Horse establish your identity. You're the man who couldn't be king but who stands closer to the throne than any other man in England. You're magnificent, controversial, indispensable, and forever marked by scandal. You've learned to live in that space between desire and impossibility, between devotion and ambition. It's a peculiar kind of prison, gilded but confining, and you'll inhabit it for the rest of your life. You're watching Elizabeth conduct business in the Privy Council chamber in the mid-1560s, and the tension in the room is thick enough to cut with a ceremonial sword. Her counsellors, men like William Cecil, the Duke of Norfolk, the Earl of Sussex, are pressing her again about marriage. They do this regularly, respectfully but insistently, because in their view England's survival depends on the Queen producing an heir. Elizabeth listens, her face composed, giving nothing away. You stand nearby, silent but present, and everyone in the room is acutely aware that you're part of the problem they're trying to solve. The Virgin Queen, they're starting to call her, though not yet with the reverence that label will eventually carry. In the 1560s, it's more accusation than compliment. A Virgin Queen is an unmarried queen, and an unmarried queen without children is a dynasty ending before it begins. Elizabeth is in her 30s, time is passing, and every year she delays, marriage is a year closer to the catastrophe her counsellors imagine her death without an heir. Civil war, foreign invasion, the Protestant settlement reversed, everything accomplished since 1558 destroyed. Parliament petitions her to marry, foreign princes send ambassadors with proposals. The Archduke Charles of Austria has suggested a good Catholic, but perhaps he could be persuaded toward Protestantism. King Eric XIV of Sweden proposes personally, sending his brother to woo Elizabeth on his behalf, the Scottish boy king, but no, he's too young and too Catholic. Philip II of Spain floats the idea of marrying Elizabeth himself. his deceased wife Mary's sister, a match that makes political sense but revolts Elizabeth's Protestant subjects who remember Spanish influence during Mary's reign. Elizabeth deflects every proposal with diplomatic brilliance. She asks questions about the suitors, their height, their health, their religious views, seeming genuinely interested, buying time. She sends ambassadors to negotiate terms, letting discussions drag on for months or years before finding reasons the match won't work. She's too busy governing to think about marriage just now. The dowry negotiations are too complicated. She needs to know if the gentleman can father children. Has he proven fertility? She worries about leaving England if she must travel to meet a foreign prince. Excuse after excuse, all delivered with enough plausibility that ambassadors return home frustrated but not quite insulted. But everyone knows the real obstacle, as long as Robert Dudley remains Elizabeth's favourite, basking in her attention and affection. She's not truly available for marriage to anyone else. Foreign diplomats write this explicitly in their reports. The Spanish ambassador notes that Elizabeth will not marry anyone except Lord Robert. The French ambassador observes that she's so enamoured of you that no foreign prince stands a chance. These reports infuriate Elizabeth when she learns of them, but she doesn't change her behaviour enough to quell the rumours. Here's where the situation becomes almost farcical in 1563. Elizabeth actually proposes that her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, should marry you. Let that sink in. Elizabeth suggests that Mary, a rival claimant to the English throne, a Catholic, a woman Elizabeth views with suspicion and jealousy, should marry Robert Dudley. Elizabeth's own favourite, the logic, such as it is, suggests that if Mary marries an Englishman loyal to Elizabeth, it might neutralise the threat Mary poses. And if Elizabeth can't marry you herself, perhaps placing you with Mary keeps you in the family, so to speak. Historians still argue about whether Elizabeth was serious. Some believe it was genuine political strategy. Others think it was a test of your loyalty. And a few suggest it was Elizabeth's way of controlling both you and Mary simultaneously. You're appalled by the proposal marry Mary Stuart, live in Scotland. Leave Elizabeth's side after years positioning yourself as indispensable to her. You politely resist, making clear you have no interest in the Scottish Queen. Mary herself seems intrigued initially, but eventually marries Lord Darnley instead, a match that will end in murder and scandal. But the fact that Elizabeth even suggested giving you to a rival reveals the complicated calculations running through her mind. The pressure on Elizabeth to marry isn't just about producing heirs, it's about proving she can govern as a woman. This is crucial to understand. England has only recently experienced female rule under Mary Tudor, and that reign ended badly with economic troubles, lost territories and religious burnings. Many men in 1560s Europe believe women are inherently unsuited to rule, that a kingdom needs a king, by remaining unmarried. Elizabeth forces England to adapt to the radical idea of a queen regnant who doesn't need a husband to govern effectively. She's proving a point with every year she stays single, but the biological clock is real, and everyone knows it. Women in the 16th century typically finish bearing children by their late 30s or early 40s. Elizabeth is 32 in 1565, 35 in 1568. Each passing year makes pregnancy less likely and more dangerous. Her counsellors aren't being unreasonable when they beg her to marry from their perspective. She's gambling with England's future by waiting. You understand this tension better than most because you're caught in the middle of it. Part of you still hopes she'll marry you despite all the obstacles. Another part recognises that won't happen and wonders what your future looks like as a perpetual favourite but never a husband. And a third part, the part that's genuinely devoted to Elizabeth. Not just ambitious for yourself, worries about what happens to her, to England. If she truly never marries and never produces an heir, There's a curious detail from this period that reveals Elizabeth's complexity. She keeps a miniature portrait of you, painted by Nicholas Hilliard, among her most private possessions. It's discovered later in her belongings, treasured and preserved. She also writes you letters, not many survive, but those that do show genuine warmth, even tenderness. She calls you her eyes, her two eyes, suggesting you're how she sees the world, essential to her vision. These aren't the words of political calculation alone, there's real feeling there. Yet she also torments you, probably deliberately. She flirts with other courtiers to make you jealous. She entertains foreign suitors and makes you watch as she dances with ambassadors, smiles at their compliments, pretends to consider their proposals. Is this cruelty strategy, or is Elizabeth trapped by circumstances that prevent her from marrying you, acting out the frustration of her own impossible position? She can't have what she wants any more than you can, and maybe causing you pain is her way of sharing that burden. The religious dimension adds another layer to the marriage question. Elizabeth is Protestant, head of the Church of England, and her choice of husband carries theological implications. Marrying a Catholic prince would alarm her Protestant subjects and might require religious compromises she's unwilling to make. But the pool of eligible Protestant princes is limited. The German princes are mostly too minor, the Swedish king too unstable, the French Protestants too embroiled in civil war. You're Protestant, which is one of your few advantages as a potential husband, but it's not enough to overcome the other objections. By the late 1560s, a pattern has solidified. Elizabeth will not marry. She hasn't announced this decision formally. She's too politically astute to close off options completely, but her actions speak clearly. The negotiations with foreign suitors are theatre, performances to maintain diplomatic relationships and keep foreign powers guessing. The real Elizabeth, the private woman behind the public queen, has chosen her path. She'll rule alone, without a husband, without children, making herself the embodiment of England in ways no married monarch could. This decision has profound consequences for you. It means you'll never be king, never legitimise your position through marriage, never father children with the woman you love or at least claim to love. Emotions and ambitions are so entangled that separating them becomes impossible. But it also means you remain essential. Elizabeth needs you precisely because she's not marrying anyone else. You provide the emotional intimacy, the masculine companionship, the romantic tension that she denied herself in refusing all other suitors. You're her chosen substitute for marriage, which is considerable power even if it's not the crown. Do you remember the young man leaving the Tower in 1554 penniless and disgraced? Look at yourself now, wealthy, influential, beloved by the Queen, a man whose favour is sought by nobles and commoners alike. You didn't get everything you wanted, who does, but you've carved out a unique position in the English history. The man who loved a queen and couldn't marry her, who stood in her shadow for decades, who built his entire life around her orbit. It's not what you dreamed as an ambitious young courtier, but it's the reality you're learning to inhabit. And there are worse fates than being indispensable to Elizabeth Tudor. You're sitting in your private chambers at court in the late 1560s, and you're writing a letter to Elizabeth. Not an official document that secretaries will copy and file, but a personal note, the kind that passes between you regularly, filled with private jokes, tender observations, and the easy intimacy of people who've known each other for decades. These letters are your secret language, a paper trail of affection that historians will later pore over, trying to decode the exact nature of your relationship. Elizabeth writes to you too, addressing you with pet names and endearments that would shock the public if they knew. She calls you her two eyes, as we've mentioned, but also uses symbols and abbreviations that create intimacy through exclusivity. Only you two understand all the references. In one letter that survives, She signs herself with two circles interlinked, perhaps representing your initials connected. It's the kind of thing lovers do, creating private codes that make the outside world disappear. The physical evidence of your correspondence is frustratingly incomplete. Many letters were destroyed deliberately, probably by one or both of you, or by executors after your deaths who understood these papers were too intimate for public consumption. But enough fragments survive to confirm that you maintained an extensive private correspondence throughout your relationship. When Elizabeth is away on progress and you're detained in London by business, letters fly back and forth. When you're travelling on her service and she remains at court, you write almost daily. Here's a detail that reveals the depth of your connection. Elizabeth keeps a locked box containing your letters and gifts. After her death in 1603, this box is found among her most private possessions, hidden away where no prying courtier could access it. Inside are letters in your handwriting, tokens you gave her over the years, and that miniature portrait we mentioned. She's kept everything, treasuring these objects like religious relics. Whatever the exact nature of your relationship, passionate lovers, romantic friends, political partners deeply attached, she clearly considers you essential to her emotional life. You give her gifts constantly, and not just the official presents that nobles routinely offer their monarch. Personal gifts, a specific book you know she'll enjoy, a piece of jewellery designed to her taste, a rare plant for her garden. Elizabeth reciprocates. She gives you land, titles, and money, yes, but also personal items, a miniature of herself, a ring, tokens that carry emotional weight beyond financial value. This exchange of gifts creates a bond that transcends the formal relationship between queen and subject. The letters reveal tensions too. You sometimes write expressing frustration or jealousy when Elizabeth pays attention to other courtiers. She occasionally responds with sharp rebukes, reminding you that she's the queen and owes explanation to no one. But even the arguments feel intimate. These are lovers' quarrels, or at least the quarrels of two people deeply invested in each other's feelings. After a fight, reconciliation letters follow, softening the tone, re-establishing connection. One letter from Elizabeth that partially survives shows her vulnerable side. She writes about the loneliness of rule, how she must always perform for her court, always project confidence and control, and how exhausting that performance becomes. With you, she suggests, she can drop the mask at least partially. You're one of the few people who knew her before she was queen, who remembers Elizabeth Tudor the princess, the prisoner, the survivor. That shared history creates trust that later favourites will never fully replicate. You respond to her vulnerability with reassurance and devotion. Your letters emphasise your loyalty, your willingness to serve, your recognition of her burdens. But you also try to maintain your own dignity. You're not a grovelling servant, but a nobleman whose service is voluntary and whose affection is genuine. This balance is delicate. Too much independence and you risk her anger. Too much subservience and you become just another courtier. You navigate this tightrope with considerable skill. Mostly. The gifts you exchange sometimes carry symbolic weight that borders on scandalous. You give her a pendant shaped like a phoenix, the mythical bird that rises from ashes, a clear reference to both your family's resurrections from disaster. She wears it publicly, making a statement about your importance to her. You commission portraits showing yourself in poses that mirror her official portraits, suggesting equivalence that shocks the aristocracy. These aren't accidents, they're calculated moves in a complex dance of power and intimacy. Historians still argue about what these letters and gifts prove. Some scholars point to the obvious romantic nature of the language, the endearments, the private codes, and conclude you must have been lovers in the physical sense. Others note that 16th century letter-writing conventions were simply more flowery than modern correspondence. that love between monarch and subject didn't necessarily imply sexual relationship, that the evidence is ambiguous at best. Here's the quirky detail that adds mystery. Several of your letters to Elizabeth contain postscripts written in a simple cipher, substituting numbers for letters or using basic code systems. Why encode parts of your correspondence if you're simply discussing politics or expressing appropriate courtier to monarch devotion? The ciphered sections suggest content sensitive enough that even private secretaries couldn't be trusted to read it. What were you writing that required such secrecy? Plans for political manoeuvres, declarations of passionate love, complaints about other courtiers. The encoded portions are mostly lost or undeciphered, leaving tantalizing gaps in the historical record. Elizabeth also sends you tokens when she's displeased with you. Silent messages carried by servants, a withdrawn favour, a cancelled appointment, a gift returned. These communicate her moods as clearly as words. You learn to read these signs, to know when to approach for reconciliation and when to give her space. It's an elaborate language of gesture and symbol that both of you become fluent in over decades together. The physical evidence of gifts survives sporadically. Some jewellery pieces you commissioned for Elizabeth still exist in museum collections, identifiable by inscriptions or provenance records. A golden locket designed to hold miniature portraits. A jewelled pendant. These objects, crafted by the finest artisans money could buy, were meant to be worn close to her body, constant reminders of your presence even when you were physically apart. That intimacy, your gift touching her skin, carries obvious symbolic weight. You also exchange books, and the marginalia in surviving volumes is fascinating. Elizabeth reads books you've given her and makes notes in the margins, sometimes responding to passages she knows will interest you. In one religious text, she underlines a passage about duty and writes a comment that seems directed at you, about the sacrifices required of those in power. Did she give you the book back so you could read her notes? Probably. This kind of intellectual intimacy, conversing through shared texts, suggests minds engaged with each other beyond mere physical attraction. The letters discuss politics too. Of course. Elizabeth seeks your opinion on matters of state, not the highest level decisions, which she reserves for formal council meetings with Cecil and others, but secondary questions where your perspective helps her think through options. You write analysing courtiers' loyalties, suggesting appointments, warning her about potential threats. These aren't love letters in the conventional sense. They're working correspondence between political partners. Yet even here, personal affection colours the language. Business and emotion blend seamlessly. Some of your correspondence deals with jealousy on both sides. You write complaining when Elizabeth dances too often with Christopher Hatton, a younger courtier who's catching her eye in the 1570s. She responds tartly that she'll dance with whomever she pleases and you have no claim to restrict her. But then, perhaps regretting her sharpness, she adds reassurance Hatton is nothing compared to you. You remain her first favourite. Her eyes, her Robert. The pattern repeats with other courtiers over the years, your jealousy, her assertion of independence, then her reassurance that you're irreplaceable. Do you remember how we discussed Elizabeth's complexity around marriage? These letters reveal that complexity in raw form. She wants emotional intimacy but guards her independence fiercely. She desires masculine companionship but refuses the legal subordination marriage would bring. She loves you in whatever form that love takes, but she loves power more, and she'll never sacrifice the latter for the former. Your letters show you gradually understanding this reality, accepting that you'll have her affection but never her hand, learning to find satisfaction in what's offered rather than mourning what's withheld. The correspondence creates a written record that both preserves and endangers your relationship. Every letter is potential evidence if enemies want to build a case about inappropriate intimacy between queen and subject. Both of you must be aware of this danger, yet you write anyway, unable to resist documenting your connection. Perhaps the need to express feeling outweighs the risk. Or perhaps you both believe the letters are secure, that loyal servants and locked boxes will protect your secrets. Mostly you're right, but enough survives to give future generations tantalizing glimpses into hearts that lived 4.5 centuries ago. You're standing in the Chapel Royal at Kenilworth Castle on a spring day in 1578 and you're getting married. The bride is Lettice Knollys, Countess of Essex, and she's beautiful, witty, ambitious, and most significantly Elizabeth's cousin. The ceremony is secret, conducted before only a handful of witnesses, because you know exactly how the Queen will react when she discovers what you've done. You're marrying another woman after nearly 20 years of devotion to Elizabeth, and not just any woman, a member of the royal family, someone Elizabeth already dislikes intensely. This is betrayal, or at least Elizabeth will see it that way, and you're about to experience her legendary fury firsthand. Let's back up a few years to understand how you arrived at this moment. Lettice Knollys is the daughter of Catherine Carey, who was Mary Boleyn's daughter, making Lettice quite possibly the granddaughter of Henry VIII himself. Though this is unacknowledged officially, she married Walter Devereux, Earl of Essex, in 1560 and bore him several children, including a son named Robert, who will grow up to cause Elizabeth enormous trouble decades later. Lettice has been at court on and off throughout the 1560s and 1570s, and you've noticed her. Everyone has. She's striking, confident, and she bears a resemblance to Elizabeth that people comment on: red hair, pale skin, that Tudor colouring. By the mid-1570s, your relationship with Elizabeth has settled into a comfortable but frustrating pattern. You're still her favourite, still master of the horse, still showered with gifts and honours. But you're in your 40s now, Elizabeth is in her 40s, and the dream of marrying her has definitively died. She's committed to remaining unmarried. The Virgin Queen identity is solidifying into official policy. You've accepted this intellectually, but emotionally it's harder. You've spent 2 decades in devotion to a woman who won't fully commit to you, and you're lonely. Lettice offers what Elizabeth won't: the possibility of marriage, children, a normal domestic life. She's been widowed in 1576 when the Earl of Essex died, somewhat suspiciously, actually leading to rumours that you had him poisoned to free Lettice for yourself. These rumours are almost certainly false. Essex died in Ireland of dysentery or poison, but you were in England and had no obvious means or motive. Still, it's grimly ironic that you're again connected to whispers about a spouse's convenient death. You begin an affair with Lettice sometime around 1576 or 1577. It's discreet at first, but court gossip being what it is, rumours circulate. Elizabeth hears the whispers and her reaction is immediate and volcanic. She's jealous, furiously jealous, in ways she never was about your wife Amy. Amy was safely in the countryside, no threat to Elizabeth's position as the primary woman in your life. But Lettice is at court, beautiful, fertile. She's proven she can bear children, unlike Elizabeth, who's now past childbearing age, and worst of all, Lettice resembles Elizabeth enough that the comparison is unavoidable and unflattering. Elizabeth banishes Lettice from court. She makes cutting remarks about Lettice's morals, calling her a she-wolf among other colourful insults. She's coldly furious with you, withdrawing favour in ways that make your position precarious. You try to reassure Elizabeth that Lettice means nothing compared to your devotion to the Queen, but it's a difficult position. You're clearly involved with Lettice in some capacity, and Elizabeth isn't fooled by your denials. Here's where you make the decision that will define the last decade and a half of your relationship with Elizabeth. You decide to marry Lettice anyway. Perhaps you're tired of living in emotional limbo. Perhaps you genuinely love Lettice. Perhaps you want children. You're in your mid-40s and childless. This might be your last chance for legitimate heirs. Perhaps it's a kind of rebellion after 20 years of devoted service that never resulted in the prize you initially sought. Whatever the motivation, you proceed with a secret marriage in 1578. The secret doesn't hold. Secrets never do at the Tudor court. By late 1579, Elizabeth has discovered your marriage. And her reaction is everything you feared and worse. She's not just angry, she's hurt, betrayed, furious in ways that go beyond political calculation into genuine emotional pain. You've spent 20 years positioning yourself as uniquely devoted to her, and now you've married someone else, not just anyone, but a woman Elizabeth despises, a woman younger and still fertile, a woman who resembles the Queen enough to feel like a replacement. Elizabeth seriously considers imprisoning you in the Tower. Her counsellors have to talk her down, reminding her that you've served loyally for 2 decades, that you've committed no treason, that imprisoning you would cause political complications. But she wants to punish you, needs to express her fury somehow. She settles for banishment from court. You're sent away in disgrace, forbidden from appearing in her presence. Stripped of some honours, though not all. It's a devastating fall for someone whose entire identity has been built around proximity to the Queen. Lettice is permanently banned from court. Elizabeth will never allow her to appear at royal functions again. This ban holds for the rest of Elizabeth's life. Nearly 25 years. Historians still argue about whether Elizabeth's fury was primarily personal jealousy or political calculation. Lettice's royal blood made her a potential threat, and your marriage to her could theoretically give you claims or ambitions toward the throne through any children you might have. Probably it's both Elizabeth's personal and political instincts were so intertwined that separating them is impossible. You spend months in exile from court, living at your estates with your new wife, trying to adjust to this new reality. Lettice is pregnant. She'll give birth to a son in 1581, your only legitimate child. Named Robert, after you. This should be a moment of joy. You're a father. You've secured your line. You have the domestic happiness you couldn't have with Elizabeth. But the cost is enormous. Your relationship with the Queen, the defining relationship of your adult life, is shattered. The trust built over decades feels broken beyond repair. You write to Elizabeth constantly, begging forgiveness, protesting your continued devotion, insisting that your marriage doesn't diminish your loyalty to her. She mostly doesn't respond, or responds curtly through intermediaries. When she does write directly, her letters are cold, formal, nothing like the warm correspondence you once shared. You've wounded her in ways that a simple apology can't heal. Here's a quirky detail that reveals the depth of Elizabeth's hurt. She commissions a portrait of herself, during this period the famous Darnley portrait, wearing an elaborate dress decorated with symbolic imagery. Art historians debate the symbolism, but some suggest the imagery includes references to betrayal and constancy tested. Whether this is specifically about you or about broader political concerns is unclear, but the timing is suggestive. Elizabeth processes her emotions through elaborate public performance, turning personal pain into political theatre. Gradually, slowly, over months and years, Elizabeth allows you to return. She needs you. It turns out other favourites have emerged. Christopher Hatton is prominent in the early 1580s, and later Walter Raleigh will catch her eye, but none of them have your history with her, your deep understanding of her mind and moods. By 1582 you're back at court, restored to most of your positions. Though the relationship has changed, there's a sadness now, a recognition that you've both lost something that can't be recovered. You maintain two households, a public one where you're Elizabeth's loyal courtier, and a private one where you're Lettice's husband and young Robert's father. This divided life becomes your reality. Elizabeth never fully forgives you. She's not capable of forgetting betrayals, especially personal ones, but she accepts your service again because she needs you and because, despite everything, the bond between you is too strong to completely sever. Lettice remains banned. Your wife can never appear at court, can never be acknowledged by the Queen, exists in a kind of social limbo as the woman who married Elizabeth's favourite. This must create tension in your marriage. How could it not? Lettice knows she's second choice. That you spent 20 years pursuing Elizabeth before settling for her. She knows that when you're at court, you're still orbiting Elizabeth, still caught in that gravitational pull. Some historians suggest Lettice resented this deeply. Others argue she accepted it as the price of marrying a man of your status and position. Your son, little Robert, dies in 1584 at age 3, probably of illness. This is devastating your only legitimate child, your heir, gone. Lettice will bear you no more children, so your marriage, which cost you so much in terms of Elizabeth's favour, doesn't even achieve the goal of securing your line. It's a tragedy layered on top of loss. Do you regret marrying Lettice? Probably sometimes you do, when Elizabeth's coldness cuts particularly deep or when you mourn your dead son. Other times, perhaps you value having someone who belongs to you completely, who isn't a queen with divided loyalties to England. The human heart is complicated, capable of loving multiple people in different ways, capable of regretting and cherishing the same decision simultaneously. You're living proof of that complexity. You're standing on a dock in Harwich in December 1585 watching ships being loaded with supplies, weapons, and thousands of soldiers. The wind coming off the North Sea is bitter, cutting through your cloak, and you're feeling every one of your 52 years. Elizabeth has appointed you commander of English forces being sent to the Netherlands to support Dutch Protestants in their rebellion against Catholic Spain. This is your chance for military glory, your opportunity to prove you're more than just the Queen's favourite. You're a capable general who can lead England's army in real combat. At least, that's what you tell yourself as you prepare to leave England for what will become one of the most frustrating experiences of your life. The Netherlands situation is complicated, as everything involving religion and power in 16th century Europe inevitably is. The Dutch provinces have been rebelling against Spanish rule since 1568, fighting for independence and Protestant religious freedom. Spain, the dominant Catholic power in Europe, has been brutally trying to suppress the rebellion. England has stayed officially neutral for years, but by 1585 Elizabeth decides she must intervene. If Spain completely conquers the Netherlands, Spanish forces will be positioned dangerously close to England's shores. Strategic necessity outweighs her natural caution about expensive foreign military campaigns. Elizabeth sends you as her representative Lieutenant General of her forces, commander of several thousand English troops and cavalry. It's a significant appointment, reflecting your importance to her despite the lingering tension from your marriage to Lettice. You're grateful for this chance. You've spent your entire adult life at court, managing stables and organising entertainments. Now, finally, you'll command in battle. Prove yourself in the traditionally masculine sphere of warfare. Your father and brothers fought in wars. You'll show England you're a Dudley worthy of that military heritage. The campaign starts poorly and gets worse. You arrive in the Netherlands in December 1585, and almost immediately the Dutch offer you something Elizabeth explicitly forbade you to accept: the title of Governor-General of the Netherlands. This would essentially make you the ruler of the Dutch provinces, at least nominally. It's a tremendous honour, and the Dutch genuinely want English leadership. But Elizabeth, when she learns you've accepted, is absolutely furious. She never authorised you to take sovereignty over foreign territory. In her mind, you've exceeded your authority, potentially entangling England in commitments she didn't approve. Elizabeth sends you blistering letters demanding to know what you thought you were doing. She orders you to renounce the title immediately. You try to explain that refusing would have offended the Dutch, that accepting was necessary for diplomatic reasons, that you never intended to act independently of her authority. But Elizabeth isn't mollified. She's hypersensitive about anyone appearing to act like royalty without her permission. It's that same issue that destroyed your father. After all, trying to elevate the family above their station. You're forced to publicly renounce the Governor-General title in humiliating fashion, undermining your authority with the Dutch forces you're supposed to command. The military situation itself is a nightmare. You have insufficient troops. Elizabeth promised more than she sends, always worried about the cost. You have inadequate supplies. Money for the campaign is slow to arrive, leaving soldiers unpaid and mutinous. You have unclear objectives. Elizabeth wants you to pressure Spain but not commit to full-scale war. A contradictory mandate that's nearly impossible to execute. And you have no real military experience commanding large forces in actual combat, which becomes obvious as the campaign unfolds. Here's a detail that reveals the chaos at one point. Your troops haven't been paid in months and are threatening to desert or mutiny. You end up paying them from your own pocket thousands of pounds of your personal fortune to keep the army functioning. This generosity earns you loyalty from the soldiers, but it's also a sign of how badly the campaign is being managed. A properly supported military operation shouldn't require the commander to personally finance it. You do achieve some successes. You relieve the siege of Grave, a town surrounded by Spanish forces. You conduct several cavalry actions that demonstrate your personal bravery. You're still physically capable. Still the skilled horseman who impressed Elizabeth decades ago. Your soldiers respect your willingness to share their hardships, to be present on the battlefield rather than commanding from safe distance. But strategic victories elude you. The Spanish are experienced, well supplied, and led by capable commanders. Your forces are always playing catch-up, reacting rather than dictating terms. The worst moment comes in September 1586 at the Battle of Zutphen. Your nephew, Philip Sidney, son of your sister Mary, a young man you love like your own son, is shot in the thigh during a cavalry charge. The wound becomes infected, and Philip dies 3 weeks later in agony. He's only 31 years old, a brilliant poet and soldier, representing everything noble about English chivalry. His death devastates you. You've lost your actual son, little Robert, 2 years earlier. Now you've lost the young man who felt like a son. The Netherlands campaign, already frustrating militarily, becomes personally tragic. There's a famous story about Philip's death, probably embellished but reflecting his reputation as he lay wounded, dying of thirst. He was offered water but gave it to another wounded soldier, saying, "Thy necessity is yet greater than mine." True or not, the story becomes famous across Europe, cementing Philip Sidney's status as the perfect Renaissance gentleman. His death is England's loss, and you feel responsible. You brought him to the Netherlands. You led the campaign where he fell. Elizabeth, back in England, grows increasingly critical of your command. She reads reports from other officers who blame you for various failures. She sees the costs mounting, money pouring into the Netherlands campaign with little to show for it. She sends you letters questioning your decisions, demanding explanations. expressing disappointment. This must sting terribly. You came to the Netherlands partly to prove yourself to her, to be more than just the master of the horse, and instead you're reinforcing her doubts about your capabilities outside the role she's always assigned you. Historians still argue about whether you were a bad commander or simply placed in an impossible situation. Some suggest you lacked the military genius required for the complex strategic environment of the Netherlands War. Others argue that no commander could have succeeded with the limited resources, contradictory objectives, and political constraints Elizabeth imposed. The Dutch themselves seem to have liked you personally and respected your efforts, but liking isn't winning, and the campaign fails to achieve its strategic goals of decisively pushing back Spanish power. By 1587 you're requesting permission to return to England. You're exhausted, frustrated, grieving Philip Sidney, and probably ill. Your health has never fully recovered from the stress and poor conditions in the Netherlands. Elizabeth grants permission, and you return home in December 1587, leaving command to others. The Netherlands campaign will continue for years. But without you, it's generally considered the greatest failure of your career, the moment when you tried to be something other than Elizabeth's favourite and fell short. Yet, there's something poignant about the attempt. You're in your 50s. You've spent your entire adult life in Elizabeth's shadow, defined by your relationship to her. The Netherlands command was your chance to define yourself independently, to achieve something in your own right. That it failed doesn't negate the courage it took to try. You went to war. You fought. You risked your life and reputation. Many courtiers talk about military glory from the safety of palace chambers. You actually went to the battlefield. When you return to England, Elizabeth receives you with mixed emotions. She's disappointed by the campaign's results, but she's also relieved you're back safely. The letters she sent you in the Netherlands were harsh, but now, with you physically present again, the old affection resurfaces. She needs you at court, needs your steady presence, needs the comfort of your familiar companionship. The Netherlands adventure is over, a failed experiment in independence. You're back where you've always been, at Elizabeth's side, in her orbit, essential but subordinate. Do you remember when you left for the Netherlands, hoping to return as a celebrated military hero? Instead, you return as a man who tried and failed, who lost his beloved nephew, who spent a fortune achieving little. But you return to Elizabeth, and perhaps that's what matters most. The relationship has survived another test, another separation, another disappointment. It bends but doesn't break. This strange bond between queen and favourite that defines both your lives. You're sitting in your study at Leicester House in London in 1584, and a servant brings you a book. Not just any book, a printed pamphlet titled Leicester's Commonwealth. And as you begin reading, your blood runs cold. This is a character assassination unlike anything you've experienced before. A systematic destruction of your reputation spread across hundreds of pages. The anonymous author accuses you of murder, poisoning, sexual depravity, treason, manipulation of the Queen, and plotting to seize the throne. It's vicious, detailed, and being distributed throughout England and Europe. Someone hates you enough to create this elaborate work of propaganda, and it's going to haunt you for the rest of your life. Leicester's Commonwealth is actually titled Leicester's Commonwealth Conceived, spoken and published with most earnest protestation of all dutiful goodwill and affection towards this realm, in its full, elaborate 16th century style. The book takes the form of a dialogue between three characters discussing your alleged crimes and villainies. It's cleverly written, entertaining enough that people read it, detailed enough that some accusations seem plausible, outrageous enough to shock and titillate, It's essentially a Tudor hit piece, and it's devastatingly effective. The accusations are wild, comprehensive, and clearly designed to destroy you. The pamphlet claims you poisoned your wife, Amy. We know those rumours already. But Leicester's Commonwealth provides elaborate details about how you supposedly arranged her murder. It accuses you of poisoning the Earl of Essex to free Lettice for marriage. It suggests you poisoned other inconvenient people over the years, presenting you as a serial killer casually murdering anyone who stands in your way. Historians still argue whether any of these accusations have merit. Most conclude they're fabrications or wild exaggerations, but some wonder if perhaps a grain of truth hides in all that mud. The pamphlet accuses you of sexual relationships with multiple women at court, of fathering illegitimate children, of maintaining mistresses while pursuing the Queen. It claims you practice witchcraft and consult with sorcerers and astrologers, serious accusations in an age that believes in demonic power. It suggests you're secretly Catholic despite your Protestant public stance. Or alternatively that you're a radical Protestant extremist planning to overthrow the religious settlement. The accusations contradict each other, but consistency isn't the point. Destruction is. Most dangerously, Leicester's Commonwealth accuses you of plotting to marry Elizabeth and seize control of England, effectively becoming king through manipulation and murder. It presents you as monstrously ambitious, willing to kill anyone, including potential heirs to the throne, who might interfere with your plans. This is treason territory. These accusations, if believed, could justify your arrest and execution. The pamphlet essentially argues that you're the greatest threat to England's security, a cancer in the body politic that must be removed. Who wrote this poison? The pamphlet is anonymous, but historians have theories. The most likely candidates are English Catholic exiles living in France or Spain, men who fled England after Elizabeth's Protestant settlement and now work to undermine her reign. Some suspect Charles Arundel, a Catholic conspirator. Others point to possible Jesuit authorship. The sophistication of the writing suggests someone educated, someone with access to court gossip and genuine knowledge of your life, someone who hates you specifically or what you represent generally. The timing is significant. Leicester's Commonwealth appears in 1584, just as England's conflict with Catholic Spain is intensifying. Spanish forces threaten the Netherlands. Catholic plots against Elizabeth are being discovered regularly, and England's Protestant identity feels under siege. In this context, attacking you Elizabeth's Protestant favourite, her closest advisor, the man many see as embodying her regime, is a way of attacking Elizabeth herself. Destroy your reputation, and you undermine confidence in the Queen's judgment. If she's foolish enough to trust a monster like Robert Dudley, how can England trust her? The book is illegal in England. Elizabeth's government bans it immediately, threatening severe punishment for anyone caught possessing or distributing copies. But that only makes it more desirable. Forbidden books always circulate, passed hand to hand, read secretly, discussed in whispers. Copies smuggle into England from the continent. Their expensive printing isn't cheap in the 1580s, but people pay because the content is scandalous and entertaining. You're famous enough that a whole book of gossip about you finds an eager audience. Elizabeth's reaction is instructive. She publicly dismisses the pamphlet as Catholic lies and defends you vigorously. This is important. Her public support helps shield you from the worst consequences of the accusations. If she seemed to credit any of the charges, your position would become untenable. But privately, some historians suggest she must have wondered. Does she ask you directly about the accusations? Do you have uncomfortable conversations about Amy's death? About your relationship with Lettice? About your ambitions? We don't know, but it's hard to imagine Elizabeth ignoring such detailed accusations completely, even if she publicly rejects them. You write a response, a declaration of the favourable dealing of Her Majesty's commissioners, Defending yourself against the charges, it's less widely circulated than Leicester's Commonwealth. Partly because self-defence is always less entertaining than scandal. Partly because your enemies control distribution networks in Catholic Europe. Your response is measured, legalistic, pointing out contradictions and impossibilities in the accusations. But responding at all might be a mistake. It gives the charges credibility they don't deserve and keeps the scandal alive in public consciousness. Here's a quirky detail about Leicester's Commonwealth. It becomes a bestseller by 16th century standards. Reprinted multiple times, translated into other languages, centuries after your death. Historians still study it as a source about your life, carefully separating probable lies from possible truths. The pamphlet achieves a kind of immortality, ensuring that alongside legitimate historical records of your achievements, there's always this shadow text full of lurid accusations. Your reputation is permanently complicated by its existence. The psychological impact on you must be profound. Imagine knowing that across England and Europe, people are reading detailed descriptions of murders you supposedly committed, sexual scandals you supposedly engaged in, treasons you supposedly plotted. Your enemies believe it all. Your friends have to defend you against it, and neutral observers wonder if perhaps some of it might be true. Even people who discount the worst accusations might think there's no smoke without fire, that you must have done something to inspire such elaborate hatred. Your health suffers during this period. The stress of the Netherlands campaign, Philip Sidney's death, Leicester's Commonwealth, and ongoing tensions with Elizabeth over your marriage to Lettice, it all accumulates. You're in your 50s now, and the relentless pressure of life at the Tudor court is wearing you down. Courtiers note that you look older, tired, that the athletic vigour of your youth is fading. You still ride well, still present a commanding figure, but the effortless energy is gone. Leicester's Commonwealth also affects how history remembers you. Even historians who recognise it as propaganda sometimes unconsciously absorb its framing. Modern biographies of you have to address the accusations, explain why they're probably false. But the very act of addressing them keeps the shadow alive. You become Robert Dudley, who is accused of murdering his wife, rather than just Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. The pamphlet achieves its goal of permanently tainting your reputation, even if it doesn't destroy you in your lifetime. Do you remember how we discussed the tower's shadow stretching over your life? Leicester's Commonwealth is another shadow, darker and more personal. A reminder that in Tudor England, reputation is fragile and enemies are always waiting to strike. You've survived treason charges against your family, survived suspicion about Amy's death, survived jealousy and faction at court. Now you survive this too, but each survival takes something from you, leave you a little more scarred, a little more aware that your position depends entirely on Elizabeth's continuing favour, and that if that favour ever fully withdraws, you'll have nothing. You're standing in the gardens at Kenilworth Castle in July 1575, and you're watching Elizabeth's reaction to the most elaborate entertainment ever staged for an English monarch. Fireworks explode overhead, reflecting in the artificial lake you created specifically for this visit. Musicians play from floating barges. Actors dressed as mythological figures emerge from the woods to perform masques praising the Queen's beauty and wisdom. You've spent thousands of pounds a fortune that would build several manor houses, creating 19 days of continuous spectacle. This is your grand gesture, your attempt to win back Elizabeth's full favour after the tensions of recent years. And perhaps, though you barely admit it even to yourself, one final attempt to persuade her to marry you. Kenilworth Castle wasn't always magnificent. When Elizabeth granted it to you in 1563, it was impressive but outdated. A medieval fortress lacking the elegance expected of Renaissance residences, you've spent 15 years transforming it into a showplace. You've added a new residential wing with enormous windows. Glass is expensive, and floor-to-ceiling windows are a statement of wealth and modernity. You've created elaborate gardens with intricate geometric patterns, fountains, and rare plants imported from across Europe. You've built that artificial lake, fed by damming a local stream, specifically so Elizabeth can enjoy water pageants and mock naval battles. The cost is staggering. Historians estimate you spend at least £1,000 per day during Elizabeth's visit. Multiply that by modern values and you're spending millions in today's money. You're financing this partly from your own estates, partly from borrowing, gambling that the investment will pay off in renewed royal favour and perhaps, finally, a proposal of marriage. It's financially reckless, but you're desperate. You're 43 years old, Elizabeth is 42, and time is running out for both of you. Elizabeth arrives on July 9th, 1575, and for 19 days you assault her senses with wonder. Every morning brings new surprises, elaborate breakfasts served on gold and silver plate, musicians playing beneath her windows, poets reciting verses composed specifically for her. Every afternoon offers activities: hunting in your park stocked with deer, boating on the lake, touring the gardens to admire new plantings. Every evening explodes with entertainment masks, plays, acrobatic displays, fireworks that light up the night sky. One entertainment becomes famous, the Lady of the Lake pageant. An actress dressed as the Lady of the Lake from Arthurian legend appears on a floating island, delivering a speech praising Elizabeth as the greatest queen in history, surpassing even legendary monarchs. The subtext is obvious: you're positioning yourself as a knight in service to this legendary queen, hinting at romance, chivalry, eternal devotion. Elizabeth watches, smiling, enjoying the flattery but giving nothing away. She's an expert at accepting adoration without committing to anything in return. You also stage a princely pleasure, an elaborate allegorical drama about the virtues of marriage. Characters representing marriage debate with characters representing virginity, with marriage ultimately winning the argument. Is not subtle, you're literally staging propaganda for your own cause, trying to persuade Elizabeth through art that marrying presumably you, though you're careful not to say it explicitly, would be wise and virtuous. Elizabeth watches this too, still smiling, still non-committal. She's probably amused by your transparent attempt at persuasion. But if she's tempted, she doesn't show it. Here's a quirky detail: you arrange for a performing bear and dogs to stage a fight for entertainment, and also present Italian tumblers doing acrobatic stunts. These are the blockbuster special effects of the 1570s, the equivalents of expensive CGI in modern films. Nothing is too extravagant, no expense spared. You want Elizabeth dazzled, overwhelmed, convinced that marrying you means a lifetime of such magnificence. The weather cooperates mostly, but there's one disaster: a planned water pageant has to be cancelled because of rain. You've prepared an elaborate show featuring Arion riding a dolphin and actor on a mechanical dolphin sculpture, but the weather makes it impossible. You're devastated by even this small failure in an otherwise perfect programme of entertainment. You want everything flawless, every moment perfectly choreographed to seduce Elizabeth into marriage. Elizabeth leaves Kenilworth on July 27th, effusive with thanks and praise. She tells you publicly that she's never been so magnificently entertained, that Kenilworth will be remembered as the high point of hospitality in her reign. She showers you with compliments, kisses your cheek in front of the assembled court, gives every sign of deep affection and appreciation. And then she returns to London without agreeing to marry you. All that money, all that effort, all those elaborate symbolic pleas for marriage, they've earned you her gratitude, but not her hand. You're crushed, though you hide it behind courtly graciousness. You knew the marriage proposal was a long shot 15 years after Amy's death. The scandal still taints you. Elizabeth's commitment to remaining unmarried is increasingly clear. The political objections remain insurmountable, but hope dies hard, and the Kenilworth entertainment was your last great gamble on that hope. Now it's definitively over. You'll never marry Elizabeth. She's made her choice, and that choice is to remain the Virgin Queen, married to England, belonging to no man. Your other estate, Wanstead in Essex, also serves as a venue for entertaining Elizabeth. Though on a less spectacular scale than Kenilworth, Wanstead is closer to London, more convenient for shorter visits. You maintain it beautifully, always ready to receive the Queen at short notice. These estates aren't just residences, they're tools of courtship, stages where you perform devotion through architectural magnificence and lavish hospitality. The entertainments you stage become famous throughout Europe. Other nobles try to imitate them when Elizabeth visits their estates, but none quite match the scale and sophistication of Kenilworth 1575. It becomes the standard against which all royal entertainments are measured. Poems and pamphlets describe the festivities, spreading your reputation as the ultimate host, the courtier who loves his queen enough to bankrupt himself entertaining her. But there's melancholy beneath the magnificence. You're performing devotion on a vast scale, but it's ultimately performance spectacle, a substitute for the real relationship you wanted. Elizabeth accepts your offerings, enjoys them thoroughly, but maintains her independence. She'll take your loyalty, your service, your love, and your fortune, but she won't give you the one thing you most desired equality through marriage. You remain the subject. She remains the queen, and no amount of fireworks or floating mythological figures changes that fundamental imbalance. Historians still argue about Elizabeth's true feelings during those 19 days at Kenilworth. Was she genuinely tempted to marry you? Was the whole visit farewell to romantic possibility? One last moment of courtship before accepting that marriage would never happen? Or was she simply enjoying being worshipped, accepting what you offered without ever seriously considering giving you what you wanted? Perhaps even she didn't fully know her own feelings, caught between desire and duty, between personal inclination and political necessity. After Kenilworth, your relationship with Elizabeth shifts into its final phase. The romantic tension fades, replaced by something more settled, deep affection, long familiarity, comfortable companionship. You're still her favourite, but the fever of possibility is gone. You both know how this story ends now, with you beside her but never married to her. Devoted until death but never crowned king. It's not what you dreamed in 1558, when the young queen appointed you master of the horse. But it's what you have, and you'll learn to make peace with it. Do you remember standing in those Kenilworth gardens, watching fireworks reflect off water, hoping this magnificent gesture would finally break through Elizabeth's resistance? That moment represents the last gasp of your great ambition. After Kenilworth, you'll still serve Elizabeth faithfully, still love her in your complicated way, still be essential to her happiness, but you'll never again believe you might be king. You're standing on a windswept field near Tilbury in Essex on a summer day in 1588, and you're organising England's land defences against the greatest military threat the country has faced in a century. The Spanish Armada, 130 ships carrying 30,000 men, is sailing up the English Channel, planning to rendezvous with Spanish forces in the Netherlands and launch an invasion of England. King Philip II of Spain has finally lost patience with Elizabeth's Protestant regime. Her support for Dutch rebels, her attacks on Spanish shipping. He sent his massive fleet to conquer England, depose Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism. And you, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, are responsible for stopping the Spanish army if it manages to land. Your appointment as commander of land forces makes strategic sense despite your mixed record in the Netherlands. You're experienced now. You've learned from previous mistakes. And most importantly, Elizabeth trusts you. In a moment of national crisis, trust matters more than technical expertise. If Spanish forces land on English soil, you'll coordinate the defence, rally the militia, protect the Queen. It's an enormous responsibility, especially for a man in his mid-50s whose health isn't what it used to be. The situation is genuinely terrifying. Spain is the superpower of 16th century Europe, controlling vast territories in Europe and the Americas, fielding the most professional army in the world. The Spanish tertius infantry formations combining pikemen and arquebusiers are legendary for their discipline and effectiveness. If they land in England, they'll face English militia, brave but poorly trained and equipped. The outcome of a land battle is far from certain. England's best hope is that the Royal Navy can prevent the Spanish from landing at all. You establish your headquarters at Tilbury, strategically positioned to defend London and the Thames River. You gather forces estimates vary, but perhaps 20,000 men eventually assemble, drawn from militia across southern England. These aren't professional soldiers, they're farmers and craftsmen called up in emergency, led by nobles and gentlemen who may or may not have military experience. You drill them as best you can in the limited time available, trying to create some cohesion and discipline. The atmosphere in camp is tense but defiant. English Protestantism has created a fierce national identity over the 30 years of Elizabeth's reign. The men gathering at Tilbury understand they're fighting not just for territory, but for religion, for their way of life, for freedom from Spanish Catholic domination. You tap into this sentiment, giving speeches about defending England, protecting the Queen, resisting tyranny. You're good at this. Decades at court have made you an expert at inspiring rhetoric and public performance. On August 8th or 9/15/88, the exact date is debated. Elizabeth herself comes to Tilbury to address the troops. This is your suggestion, probably. You know the morale value of the Queen appearing personally, showing she's willing to share danger with her soldiers. Elizabeth rides to the camp, and you're beside her, as you've been beside her for 30 years, master of the horse still, even now arranging her public appearances and ensuring her safety. What happens next becomes one of the most famous moments in English history. Elizabeth, wearing armour over her dress, addresses the assembled troops. The speech she gives, or at least the speech later attributed to her, includes immortal lines. "I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." She declares she would rather die than see dishonour touch her kingdom. She promises to live or die with her soldiers, to share their fate. Here's where historical uncertainty creeps in. We don't have a contemporary transcript of Elizabeth's Tilbury speech. The famous version comes from sources written years later, possibly embellished, possibly partly invented. Historians still argue about what Elizabeth actually said that day. Did she deliver that magnificent speech about having a king's heart, or is that legend, later propaganda that solidified into history? We don't know for certain, but what's undeniable is that she came to Tilbury. She addressed the troops, and her presence inspired them. The specific words matter less than the courage of appearing at all. You're there for all of it, managing logistics, ensuring security, probably helping draft whatever speech Elizabeth delivers. This is your role perfected over decades, facilitating Elizabeth's greatness, enabling her iconic moments, standing just behind her as she steps into legend. You don't resent it anymore, or if you do, you've learned to bury that resentment so deep that even you can't always find it. The Armada battle unfolds at sea while you prepare for land invasion that never comes. English ships harass the Spanish fleet as it moves up the channel. Fire ships scattered among the Spanish vessels at Calais break their formation. A battle off Gravelines damages many Spanish ships. But mostly, weather destroys the Armada, storms scatter the fleet, driving ships north around Scotland and Ireland, where many wreck on rocky coasts. Of the 130 ships that left Spain, fewer than half return. Spain loses approximately 15,000 men to battle, disease, shipwreck, and starvation. England is saved, not primarily by military genius but by maritime skill. Good luck, and what English Protestants immediately interpret as divine providence. God himself, they proclaim, sent storms to defend Protestant England from Catholic Spain. Medals are struck reading God blew and they were scattered. The Armada's defeat becomes a founding myth of English exceptionalism, proof that England enjoys special divine favour. You never have to fight the land battle you prepared for, and frankly, that's probably fortunate. Your forces would have fought bravely, but professional Spanish tercios might have defeated English militia in open battle. But you've done your job, assembled forces, organised defences, kept English morale high, enabled Elizabeth's legendary Tilbury appearance. When the crisis passes, you receive credit for your role, further cementing your position as one of Elizabeth's most important servants. The Armada's defeat transforms the European balance of power. Spain remains powerful but is no longer invincible. England's confidence surges. They faced the superpower and survived, even triumphed. Elizabeth's reign, already successful, achieves a new level of glory. And you've been part of it. Though, as always, in a supporting role, Elizabeth stands centre stage at Tilbury. You're in the wings, making sure she has an audience and that everything runs smoothly. Here's a detail that reveals the personal cost. The stress and physical strain of the Armada summer accelerates your declining health. You're exhausted, worn out by decades of service, and the frantic preparations at Tilbury in summer heat take a toll. After the crisis passes, you're noticeably weaker. Courtiers comment that Lord Leicester looks old, tired, perhaps seriously ill. You try to maintain your usual vigour, but your body is failing in ways that willpower can't overcome. The Armada summer is your last great service to Elizabeth. You've been with her since 1558, 30 years of constant attendance, devotion, service. You've organised her stables and her military defences. You've loved her through whatever strange form that love has taken. Constant despite marriage, despite disappointments, despite the impossibility of fulfilling your deepest ambitions. Now, with England saved and Elizabeth secure, your story is approaching its end. Do you remember that windswept field at Tilbury? Watching Elizabeth inspire troops, knowing the Spanish might land at any moment? That's your final moment of historical importance, your last chance to stand beside her during a crisis that will be remembered for centuries. Pray. Everything after this is epilogue, the slow diminuendo of a life lived in service to an extraordinary woman and an impossible dream. You're lying in bed at Cornbury Lodge in Oxfordshire on the morning of September 4th, 1588, and you know you're dying. Your body knows it. The fever that's burned through you for days isn't breaking. Your strength is gone. Breathing is difficult. Your mind knows it too, with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end. You're 55 years old, and your extraordinary life is running out like sand through an hourglass. There's something you need to do before it's too late to write one final letter to Elizabeth, the woman who has been the sun around which your entire adult existence has orbited. The month since the Armada's defeat has been brutal on your declining health. After the crisis passed and Elizabeth returned to London, you set out for your estate at Wanstead to rest and recover. You're exhausted, worn down by 3 decades of service and the intense stress of organising England's defence. But instead of improving, you get worse. A fever develops, probably malaria, historians later speculate, though diagnoses are uncertain in Tudor medicine. Or perhaps it's a stomach ailment, cancer, or simply the accumulated toll of years finally claiming its due. You make it only as far as Cornbury Lodge before you're too sick to continue travelling. Cornbury is a hunting lodge belonging to your stepson Robert, the young Earl of Essex Lettice's son from her first marriage, whom you've helped raise. It's not a grand place, nothing like your magnificent estates at Kenilworth or Leicester House, but it's where you happen to be when your body finally gives up. There's something appropriate about dying at a relatively modest hunting lodge rather than in palatial splendour. You've always loved hunting, riding, the outdoor pursuits that connected you to Elizabeth through shared interests. Lettice is with you, your wife of 10 years, the woman whose marriage to you shattered your relationship with Elizabeth and changed everything. What passes between you in these final days? Does she comfort you, mourn the approaching loss, feel resentment that even now, dying, you're thinking primarily of Elizabeth rather than her? The historical record is silent on Lettice's feelings, but she must have understood, probably from the beginning, that she could never fully possess your heart while Elizabeth lived. You dictate your final letter to Elizabeth. Writing it yourself is impossible, you're too weak. Hands too unsteady, so a secretary takes down your words. This letter survives, preserved by Elizabeth herself, and it's one of the most poignant documents of the Tudor period. You address her as most dear and gracious sovereign, maintaining proper form even in extremis. You tell her you've tried to visit her at court, but your illness prevents it. You express hope that you might recover enough to see her again, but the letter's tone suggests you know you won't. Most significantly, you write, "I humbly kiss your foot," and sign yourself, "Your Majesty's most faithful and obedient servant." Even dying, you remain her servant, her faithful subject, the man who spent 3 decades in devoted service. There's no complaint about roads not taken, no bitterness about denied marriage, no regret expressed, just loyalty, service, devotion to the end, its dignity and self-abnegation mixed together. The performance of a role you've played so long it's become your identity. The letter reaches Elizabeth at court, probably within a day or two. Her reaction, when she learns you're seriously ill, is immediate concern. She sends her own physicians to attend you too late. As it turns out, but the gesture shows she cares. She dispatches messages expressing worry, perhaps offering prayers for your recovery. Does she sense this is goodbye? Does she understand that the man who's been her constant companion for 30 years is slipping away? You die on September 4th, 1588, less than a month after England's great victory over the Armada. The timing is almost symbolic. You've lived to see England saved, Elizabeth secure, the Protestant cause triumphant. Your life's work is complete. You've served your queen faithfully through triumph and scandal, through intimacy and estrangement, through personal disappointment and national crisis. Now you can rest. The news reaches Elizabeth quickly. Her grief is reportedly intense and private. She withdraws from court activities, refusing to conduct business for several days. She's lost the man who knew her longest and best, who shared her childhood dangers, who loved her in whatever complicated way that love manifested more constantly than anyone else. Other favourites have come and gone. You were the constant, the irreplaceable one. And now, you're gone. Here's the detail that breaks hearts across centuries. Elizabeth takes your final letter and writes on the outside, in her own hand, his last letter. She locks it away in a small chest beside her bed, where it remains for the rest of her life. She never destroys it, never files it away with other correspondence. She keeps it close, this final message from her Robert. Her eyes, the man who devoted his life to her service. When she dies 15 years later, the chest is found with your letter still inside, still labelled in her distinctive handwriting, still treasured. Your death creates practical problems immediately. You die deeply in debt, all that spending on Kenilworth entertainments, financing military campaigns from your own pocket, maintaining the lifestyle expected of England's Premier Earl has left you nearly bankrupt despite your wealth. Your estates are encumbered, creditors circle, and poor Lettice is left to sort out a financial disaster. She'll fight for years to secure her widow's rights and pay down debts. The magnificent life you projected publicly was built partly on borrowed money, a house of cards that collapses when you're no longer there to charm creditors and secure royal grants. Elizabeth provides some financial help to your widow and stepson, not generously, but enough to prevent complete ruin. It's telling that even in this, Elizabeth's complicated feelings about Lettice persist. She's grieving you, but she still resents the woman who married you, and her assistance is grudging. Lettice will eventually remarry scandalously to a much younger man and live until 1634, dying at 90, having outlived both you and Elizabeth by decades. But that's her story, not yours. Your funeral is magnificent, befitting your rank. You're buried at the Collegiate Church of St. Mary in Warwick, in the Beauchamp Chapel where your ancestors lie. The ceremony includes all the heraldic pageantry appropriate for an earl, banners displaying your coat of arms, elegies praising your virtues, great nobles attending to show respect. It's theatre, performance, the public face of grief. The private grief Elizabeth's locked away in her chambers is invisible but more profound. Historians still argue about your legacy. Some see you as an opportunistic social climber who used Elizabeth's affection to accumulate power and wealth you didn't deserve. Others view you as a faithful servant who genuinely loved his queen and served England competently in difficult circumstances. Probably you were both ambitious and devoted, calculating and sincere, a man whose motivations were as mixed and complex as anyone's. You contained multitudes, contradictions, the full messy humanity that simple judgments can't capture. The question that haunts, did Elizabeth truly love you? The evidence suggests yes, in her way. She kept your letter, mourned your death, gave you 3 decades of favour and intimacy. But she also refused to marry you, sometimes treated you coldly, shared her attention with other favourites. Perhaps the question itself is wrong. Perhaps Elizabeth's form of love was necessarily complicated by power, by her position as queen, by the impossibility of vulnerability when you're England's sovereign. She loved you as much as a queen could love a subject, which was simultaneously everything and not quite enough. Do you remember writing that final letter, knowing these were probably the last words you'd ever communicate to the woman who defined your life? Your Majesty's most faithful and obedient servant, even at the end. You're performing loyalty, fulfilling the role you chose or that chose you. It's beautiful and heartbreaking, this absolute devotion that never wavered even when it wasn't fully reciprocated. You died as you lived in Elizabeth's service, focused on her, subordinating yourself to her greatness. Some might call that tragedy, others might call it love. You're not here anymore, you died in 1588, but if you could observe from beyond, you'd see Elizabeth in her private chambers at Whitehall Palace in the days after receiving the news of your death. She's 55 years old, the same age you were when you died, and she's surrounded by concerned ladies-in-waiting who don't quite know how to comfort a grieving queen. Elizabeth doesn't cry. Publicly, queens can't afford to show that kind of vulnerability, but her face is drawn, her movements slow, and everyone at court understands that something essential has broken inside her. She refuses to see petitioners for days. State business that normally commands her immediate attention sits untouched. William Cecil, now Lord Burleigh, her most trusted political adviser, tries to draw her back into governance. But she waves him away. Let England wait, her attitude suggests. Let the whole world wait. Robert is dead, and nothing feels quite real or important in the immediate aftermath of that loss. It's unprecedented behaviour for Elizabeth, who has built her reign on tireless attention to duty and unwavering public composure. The court watches nervously. Elizabeth has suffered losses before her half-sister Mary died, before Elizabeth became queen. Various counsellors and friends have passed over the years, but nothing has affected her like this. Some courtiers begin to understand, perhaps for the first time, just how central you were to Elizabeth's emotional life. They'd observed your closeness for 30 years, gossiped about it, speculated about it. But seeing Elizabeth's grief makes the depth of the bond undeniable. You weren't just her favourite courtier, you were something more fundamental, her companion, her comfort, her connection to a past before she was queen. She retrieves your letters, not just the final one, but others she saved over the years, and reads through them. What does she find in those pages? Declarations of devotion? Certainly. Political advice, shared jokes, intimate observations. The written record of a relationship that spanned decades, that survived scandal and separation and disappointment, but never quite broke. Historians still argue whether these letters prove a sexual relationship. But that question misses something important, whatever the physical dimension. The emotional intimacy was profound and real. Elizabeth orders a monument for you, though characteristically she doesn't pay for it herself. Your family bears that cost. Adding to Lettice's financial burdens, the monument in Warwick is impressive. A tall tomb chest bearing your effigy in full armour, looking eternally youthful and heroic. The inscription praises your virtues, your service to queen and country, your noble character. It's all standard aristocratic funeral propaganda, saying nothing about the complicated man you actually were, the scandals and ambitions and compromises. But it preserves your memory in stone, ensuring future generations will know the Earl of Leicester served Elizabeth I. Within weeks of your death, Elizabeth elevates your stepson Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, to unprecedented favour. Essex is 21 years old, handsome, charismatic, ambitious, and the son of Lettice, the woman Elizabeth despises. Yet she brings him close, gives him positions and honours, makes him her new favourite. Historians still argue about why. Some suggest Essex reminds her of you in your youth, athletic, charming, eager for glory. Others propose she's trying to hold on to some connection to you through your stepson. Perhaps she sees promoting Essex as a way to honour your memory while simultaneously tormenting Lettice by giving her son what Lettice herself can never have access to: the Queen. Essex will eventually overreach catastrophically, leading a failed rebellion in 1601 that ends with his execution. But that tragedy is years in the future. In 1588, he's just a young man being swept into royal favour he hasn't earned, benefiting from Elizabeth's grief for you and her complicated feelings about the family you married into. It's characteristic of Elizabeth's emotional complexity that she can hate Lettice while loving Lettice's son, that she can mourn you while promoting your successor, that she never stops being both deeply feeling and politically calculating. Here's a quirky detail about Elizabeth's mourning. She apparently keeps a miniature portrait of you in her bedchamber, positioned where she can see it from her bed. Servants notice but say nothing. What could they say? The Queen is entitled to her grief, her memories, her private devotion to a dead man. The portrait watches over her nights, a silent companion replacing the living presence that dominated 30 years of her life. Your death changes the dynamic at court in subtle ways. For 3 decades, everyone understood that access to Elizabeth often ran through you, that your favour was valuable, that you were a power broker second only to Burleigh. Now that power structure is gone, other courtiers jockey for position, trying to fill the vacuum you've left. Walter Raleigh, Christopher Hatton, and eventually Essex compete to become Elizabeth's primary masculine companion, but none of them replicate what you had with her. They lack your history, your knowledge of her moods and preferences, your decades of accumulated trust. Elizabeth's grief gradually transitions into memory. She continues governing effectively. She's too skilled and too devoted to duty to remain paralysed by loss. But those who know her well notice changes. She's more isolated, less willing to form deep attachments. She's always been cautious about trust. After your death, she's even more guarded. Perhaps losing you taught her the cost of caring deeply, and she decides unconsciously that she won't risk that kind of pain again. She sometimes refers to you in conversation, particularly when reminiscing with old courtiers who remember the early years of her reign. Lord Leicester would have handled this differently. She might observe during a policy discussion, or, Lord Leicester once told me, invoking your memory as continued counsel. It's a way of keeping you present, consulting the internal version of you she's internalised over 3 decades. You've become part of her decision-making process even in death, a ghostly advisor whose opinions she can imagine because she knew you so well. The private nature of Elizabeth's deepest grief means we'll never fully understand it. She left no diary, no confessional letters describing her feelings about your death. We have only external observations: her withdrawal from business, her preservation of your letters, her promotion of Essex, the portrait in her chamber. The internal landscape of her mourning remains inaccessible, locked away in a heart she learned early to guard carefully. But the external evidence suggests profound loss, a wound that never completely heals. Here's what we know with certainty 15 years later. When Elizabeth herself is dying in 1603, that chest containing your final letter is still beside her bed. Through all the events of her later reign, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, the defeat of additional Spanish invasion attempts, the flowering of English drama and poetry, the wars in Ireland, she kept your letter close. His last letter, written in her hand, preserved until her own death. Whatever scholars debate about the nature of your relationship, that label tells us something essential about Elizabeth's feelings. You remained important to her until the very end. Do you remember? No. You can't remember. You're gone. But if you could know how she mourned you, would it bring comfort or sorrow? You spent 30 years seeking her complete love, never quite receiving it in the form you desired. But in death, you received something perhaps more precious: her private, enduring grief. She couldn't marry you in life, couldn't give you the crown you dreamed of, couldn't love you openly without compromising her power. But she could and did mourn you privately, deeply and permanently. Maybe that was her form of love all along, expressed in the only way a queen could express it: through loss, through memory, through the careful preservation of your final words. You're absent from history now, but your influence continues rippling through the final 15 years of Elizabeth's reign like waves from a stone thrown into still water. The court you knew has changed, but your memory shapes it in unexpected ways. Your stepson Essex rises meteorically, becoming Elizabeth's new favourite. And everyone, including Essex himself, understands he's walking a path you carved. The relationship between ageing queen and ambitious young favourite follows patterns you established. Though Essex lacks your patience and political instincts, fatal deficiencies that will eventually destroy him, your family name continues. Though not through legitimate descendants, your son with Lettice died as a toddler, and you left no recognised heir of your body. But your brother Ambrose survives you by 2 years, and through your nephews and more distant relatives. the Dudley influence persists at court. More significantly, your patronage network, the clients, servants, and allies you accumulated over 30 years remains active. These men remember your generosity, your ability to advance careers, and they transfer some of that loyalty to your memory and to those who are close to you. The Dudley reputation, so badly damaged by your father's treason and Amy's death, has been partially rehabilitated by your service to Elizabeth. History is starting to remember you as Elizabeth's faithful servant rather than merely as a scandal-ridden favourite. The truth, as always, is more complex. You are both faithful servant and ambitious opportunist, devoted lover and calculating politician, but public memory simplifies, and the version of you that survives into the 1590s emphasises loyalty and service. Leicester's Commonwealth still circulates, but it's increasingly seen as Catholic propaganda rather than reliable history. Elizabeth's later years are marked by increasing melancholy. She's lost most of her generation. Burghley dies in 1598, leaving Elizabeth nearly alone among the great figures who shaped her early reign. She's surrounded by younger courtiers who never knew the dangerous years when her throne seemed precarious, who take England's Protestant security for granted. Essex's rebellion in 1601 particularly devastates her. This young man she elevated, this stepson of yours she favoured partly because of you, tries to overthrow her government. She has him executed, but the betrayal wounds her deeply. Perhaps she thinks of you in those dark days, remembering a favourite who, whatever his faults, never betrayed her. Historians in later centuries become fascinated by your relationship with Elizabeth, and you become one of the most written about figures of the Tudor period. Novelists fictionalise your romance, playwrights dramatise your ambitions, biographers attempt to separate fact from legend. Amy's death remains an endless source of speculation, murder, accident, suicide, and your own character is endlessly debated. Were you a great love denied fulfillment, or an ambitious schemer who nearly manipulated his way to the throne? Every generation of historians seems to answer differently, projecting their own assumptions about love, power, and gender onto your story. Your estates are eventually dispersed. Kenilworth, that magnificent castle you transformed and where you staged the legendary 1575 entertainment, passes through various hands before eventually becoming a ruin. Today, English Heritage maintains the site, and tourists walk through the gardens you created, stand in the rooms where Elizabeth stayed, imagine the fireworks and pageants you staged. The castle is a ghost now, stone fragments of your aspirations, but it still speaks of the grandeur you achieved and the effort you invested in trying to win a queen's heart. Leicester House in London is eventually demolished, replaced by other buildings as the city grows and changes. Nothing physical remains of your primary London residence, though historical markers note where it stood. Your monuments in Warwick survive, keeping your memory alive in the town where your family held influence. These stone fragments, castle ruins, tombs, memorial plaques are all that remain physically of your extraordinary life. But they're enough to ensure you're not forgotten. Here's a detail scholars find intriguing. Several of Elizabeth's later portraits include subtle symbols that might reference you. A pendant she wears, a background detail, elements that cognoscenti would recognise as connected to you or your shared history. Elizabeth was expert at encoded messages in portraiture, using visual symbols to communicate complex ideas about power, virginity, and divine favour. If these portraits do reference you and art historians still argue about interpretations, it suggests you remained present in her self-presentation even years after your death. You were part of her story, part of how she understood herself, and she acknowledged that through these subtle artistic choices, the question of whether you and Elizabeth were physically lovers remains one of history's great mysteries, and frankly, it probably should remain mysterious. The evidence is ambiguous, contradictory, susceptible to multiple interpretations. Some contemporaries clearly believed you were lovers. Others insisted the relationship was chaste. Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting would have known the truth, but their testimony doesn't survive in reliable form. What we can say with certainty is that you shared an intense emotional intimacy, that Elizabeth loved you in some form, and that your relationship was the most important romantic in the broad sense connection of both your lives. Your legacy extends into unexpected areas. The entertainments you staged, particularly at Kenilworth, influenced the development of English court masques and theatre. Shakespeare was probably influenced by the pageants and allegorical dramas you commissioned. Some scholars argue that specific scenes in his plays reference entertainments you staged. You were a patron of the arts, supporting poets, musicians, and performers, and that patronage contributed to the flowering of English Renaissance culture. It's a more subtle legacy than military victories or political reforms, but arguably more enduring. The Protestant cause you championed throughout your life ultimately triumphs. England remains Protestant after Elizabeth's death. The Spanish threat is contained, and the religious settlement Elizabeth established endures. You played a role in that success as Master of the Horse, as military commander during the Armada threat, as a prominent advocate for Protestant interests. Is not the glory you dreamed of in youth you won't be remembered as King Robert, but its meaningful contribution to English history nonetheless. Lettice lives on until 1634, dying at the extraordinary age of 90 or 91. She remarries twice after your death, first to Christopher Blunt, who was executed after participating in Essex's rebellion, then possibly a third time in her old age. She's a survivor, a woman who outlives her first husband. You, both of Elizabeth's parents, Elizabeth herself, and her own son Essex. Her long life spans the reigns of 5 English monarchs. In her final years, does she think of you, the man she married despite knowing he loved the Queen more? The historical record is silent on her private thoughts, but she survives while you've been gone for decades. A reminder that sometimes the supporting characters in great romances have their own rich, complex stories. Do you exist in these decades after your death only in memory, in the letters Elizabeth preserves, in the monuments marking your grave, in the historical records that future scholars will study? Your consciousness is gone, but your impact persists in the people you influenced, the structures you built, the cultural moment you helped create. It's a kind of immortality, though probably not the kind you imagined when you were a young man dreaming of marrying a queen and becoming King of England. The Tudor period itself is ending. Elizabeth dies in 1603, the last of her dynasty, and James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England, uniting the crowns and ushering in a new era. The world you knew, the Tudor court with its particular dynamics, personalities, and conflicts vanishes into history, but history preserves it, and 4 centuries later, people still study your life, still wonder about your relationship with Elizabeth, still debate whether you were a tragic hero or opportunistic villain or something in between. You've achieved a different kind of immortality you're interesting, and in a way, that might matter more than being king. You're nowhere and everywhere now, existing only in the collective memory of a story that refuses to fade even after more than 4 centuries. Historians open leather-bound volumes in archives, carefully turning pages of your letters to Elizabeth, trying to decode the intimacy and ambition written between the lines. Students read about you in textbooks, learning you as a footnote to Elizabeth's greatness, her favourite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, a supporting character in someone else's magnificent story. And in that supporting role, perhaps, lies the answer to the question that has haunted us throughout this long night. Did you achieve anything lasting? Or was your entire life merely devotion to a dream that never materialized? The simplest answer is that you achieved both everything and nothing. You never became king. That dream died with Amy at the bottom of the stairs in 1560, if it was ever truly possible at all. You never married the woman you spent 30 years loving, never legitimized your position through royal union, never fathered the heirs who might have extended your influence into future generations. By the measures you set for yourself as a young, ambitious man fresh from the Tower's shadow, you failed. The Dudley restoration was incomplete. Your father tried to make a Dudley king by force and lost his head. You tried to become king through love and lost the possibility. But measured differently, you succeeded magnificently. You rose from disgrace to become one of the most powerful men in England, accumulating wealth, titles, and influence beyond most people's dreams. You served your queen faithfully for 3 decades, standing beside her during crises that could have destroyed her reign. You helped defend England against Spanish invasion, patronised the arts, advanced Protestant causes, and created moments of cultural brilliance, those Kenilworth entertainments, for instance, that people still study and admire. You loved deeply, even if that love couldn't take the conventional form you desired. These aren't small accomplishments. These are the marks of a life lived with passion and purpose. The tragedy, if it is tragedy, lies in the gap between what you wanted and what was possible. Elizabeth could never marry you without compromising her power. A queen regnant in the 16th century was an anomaly, a woman ruling in a world that assumed masculine authority. Elizabeth maintained her position partly by remaining unmarried, by belonging to no man, by making herself the embodiment of England itself. Marrying you would have subordinated her to a husband, as English law and social custom dictated. She chose power over personal happiness, the crown over the heart, and you were caught in the consequences of that choice. But here's what historians sometimes miss in analysing your story. Maybe Elizabeth's form of love was the one she offered. Maybe the intimacy, the favour, the 30 years of companionship were her version of marriage, expressed in the only way a queen could express it. She kept your letters until death. She mourned you intensely. She trusted you with responsibilities she gave to almost no one else. She made you master of the horse, keeping you literally at her side for 3 decades. These weren't substitutes for love. They were love, in the particular form available to a woman who was simultaneously Elizabeth the woman and Elizabeth the Queen of England. Your relationship with Elizabeth matters to us, 4 centuries later, because it speaks to fundamental human experiences' unrequited love. Devotion despite disappointment, the collision between personal desire and social duty, the question of whether it's better to have loved impossibly than never to have loved at all. Your story is Shakespeare's romantic tragedies made real, star-crossed lovers prevented from union not by feuding families but by the weight of history, politics, and power itself. We're moved by it because we recognise the emotions, even though the specific circumstances, queens and favourites, courts and scandals are foreign to modern experience. Historians still argue whether you were genuinely in love with Elizabeth or merely ambitious for the throne. This question might be unanswerable because love and ambition were so thoroughly entangled in your situation that separating them is impossible. You probably loved Elizabeth the woman and desired Elizabeth the Queen simultaneously, and distinguishing between these motivations is artificial. Human beings rarely have single, pure motivations. We're complex. contradictory, capable of loving someone and also wanting what their position can give us. You contained multitudes, and so did your relationship with Elizabeth. The mystery of Amy's death will never be solved with certainty. Modern forensic analysis of the historical evidence suggests accident is most likely breast cancer, causing bone fragility, a fall, tragic timing that made innocent circumstances look suspicious. But we'll never know for sure. And that uncertainty has become part of your story's appeal. The unsolved mystery keeps people interested, keeps novelists writing and historians debating. In a strange way, Amy's ambiguous death ensures your immortality by making your story irresistible to each new generation discovering Tudor history. Elizabeth lived 15 years after you died, and during those years she must have thought of you often. Every entertainment at court would remind her of the spectacles you organised. Every ride would recall your presence as master of the horse. Every political crisis would make her wish for your counsel, your understanding of her mind and moods. You haunted her final years not as a ghost but as an absence, a hole in the fabric of her life that no one else could fill. Essex tried and failed catastrophically. Raleigh came close but never achieved your intimacy. In the end, Elizabeth died as she lived alone, the Virgin Queen married to England, but perhaps wishing in her private heart that things could have been different. Your story asks questions more than it provides answers. Can you love someone fully while simultaneously pursuing your own advancement through them? Can devotion survive decades of disappointment? What does it mean to spend your entire adult life in someone's shadow? Even when that someone is the sun around which your world revolves, these aren't questions with simple answers. And perhaps that's why your relationship with Elizabeth continues fascinating historians, novelists, and anyone who thinks deeply about love, power, and the choices we make. The final mystery is Elizabeth's true feelings. Did she love you romantically, physically, with the kind of passion poets describe, or was her affection more complex, deep attachment mixed with political calculation, genuine care filtered through the constant awareness of her royal position? We have evidence for both interpretations, and probably the truth encompasses elements of each. Elizabeth was a woman who felt deeply, but who also never forgot she was queen. Her love, if we can call it that, was necessarily complicated by power, and understanding it requires accepting that complexity rather than reducing it to simple romantic categories. So here, at the end of our long night journey through your life, what do we conclude, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester? You were a man who loved a queen and served her faithfully despite never achieving your deepest desire. You were ambitious and devoted, calculating and sincere, flawed and admirable. You were human in all that word's complexity, living through extraordinary circumstances that tested the limits of love, loyalty, and ambition. Your story matters because it's both unique. How many people spend 30 years as the favourite of a virgin queen and universal? Touching emotions and dilemmas we all understand. 437 years after your death, we still tell your story, still wonder about your relationship with Elizabeth, still debate whether you were a tragic hero or opportunistic villain or simply a man doing his best in impossible circumstances. That continued interest is its own kind of triumph. You're remembered, discussed, analysed, and reimagined by generation after generation. You're not king, but you're immortal in the stories we tell about love, power, and the Tudor age. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being interesting, being remembered, being part of humanity's collective memory is its own kind of victory, even if it's not the victory you dreamed of in your youth. The sun is rising somewhere. Though not for you, your sun set in 1588 at Cornbury Lodge, your final words to Elizabeth written, your service complete. But the story continues, carried forward by everyone who discovers Tudor history and becomes fascinated by the question at its heart, did the Virgin Queen truly love the man who devoted his life to her? We'll never know with certainty. And that uncertainty is beautiful in its way. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysterious, some questions unanswerable. Your relationship with Elizabeth is one of history's great love stories precisely because we can't reduce it to simple facts, can't explain it completely, can't solve it like a mathematical equation. It remains gloriously, frustratingly, beautifully ambiguous like love itself, like all the most important things in life. The story settles around you now like a soft blanket, all its threads woven together, all its questions asked even if not all can be answered. Robert Dudley lived his life in Elizabeth's shadow, but perhaps that shadow was itself a kind of light, the reflected glory of standing beside the sun. He never became king, but he became something else unforgettable, essential. The man whose devotion defined an era, and whose story still moves us across the vast distance of centuries. Let yourself drift now, imagining torchlit corridors at Hampton Court, the rustle of silk and velvet, the distant sound of lute music floating through stone passageways. See Elizabeth in her private chambers, years after Robert's death, holding that letter marked his last letter, reading his final words one more time. Feel the weight of 30 years of shared history, of love expressed imperfectly through the constraints of power and duty, of devotion that survived despite or perhaps because of its impossibility. The story is complete now, though the questions linger like gentle echoes. Was it love? Was it ambition? Was it both? Neither. Something in between that language can't quite capture. Let these questions fade into the softness of sleep, becoming dreams rather than problems to solve. Robert and Elizabeth lived their complex, passionate, frustrated, devoted lives centuries ago. They're at rest now, their struggles finished, their story preserved in archives and imagination, in late-night tellings like this one, in the hearts of everyone who believes that love, even impossible love, especially impossible love, matters more than success or failure, crowns or kingdoms. Sleep now, dear listener. The story is told. The candles can gutter out, the past can rest, and so can you. Having walked beside Robert Dudley through his long, devoted life in Elizabeth's shadow, sweet dreams of Tudor gardens, midnight letters, and love that transcends the centuries separating us from their world. Sweet dreams,